They erased her like she was already dead. Queen Evelyn Marrow, once the sharpest mind in the empire, was now a ghost haunting the abandoned eastern wing, while her husband paraded a younger woman through her throne room. But here's what the emperor forgot. The most dangerous woman in any palace is the one you forced into silence. The one you taught that loyalty means nothing. The one you gave nothing left to lose. So stay with me until the end of this story, because what comes next will make you rethink every betrayal you've ever witnessed. And if you're watching this, drop your city name in the comments and hit that like button. I want to know where my people are watching from. The morning Evelyn Marrow understood she had become invisible started like any other morning in the Palace of Lies. She woke before dawn in the eastern wing, where dust gathered on marble floors that once gleamed under the attention of 24 servants. Now there was one. A girl named Mira, barely 16, who brought cold tea and yesterday's bread because the kitchens claimed they had forgotten. The forgotten queen existed. Evelyn didn't complain. She had stopped complaining 6 months ago when complaining revealed itself as another form of begging, and queens did not beg. She dressed herself. Her gowns had gone from silk to simple linen, the kind provincial nobility wore when they wanted to seem humble. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had once chosen the empire's fashion, and now she couldn't choose her own breakfast. The mirror showed a woman of 38 who looked older in certain lights and younger in others depending on how much sleep she'd stolen from her racing mind. Dark hair streaked with silver she refused to hide. Green eyes that had watched too many smiles turn into knives. A face that had been called beautiful once, back when beauty mattered, back when her husband looked at her like she was the answer to questions he hadn't yet learned to ask. Now Cedric looked through her, past her, around her, as if she had already vanished. Evelyn descended the eastern stairs where portraits of her had been replaced with empty walls, white squares marking where her face used to hang. Each blank space a small execution, each removal approved by someone who thought they were safe. She kept a list in her mind, names, faces, whispers overheard in hallways. The grand corridor stretched ahead, cold and vast, designed to make anyone walking it feel small. Evelyn had learned to walk it like she owned every stone. Because she had. Once. The Western Wing held the Emperor's chambers now, and his advisors, and his secrets, and her replacement, Lady Seraphine Holt, 23, golden hair, a laugh like broken crystal, daughter of Lord Holt, whose armies controlled the northern territories, and whose loyalty could be bought with a crown that didn't belong to him yet. Evelyn had watched Seraphine arrive 4 months ago, all wide eyes and soft voices, playing the innocent girl who just wanted to serve the Empire. The kind of performance that fooled men who wanted to be fooled. Cedric wanted to be fooled. The throne room doors stood open ahead. Evelyn could hear voices inside, laughter, the sound of power moving through the room like a living thing, touching everyone except her. She stepped inside. No one turned. 50 nobles stood in clusters, their conversations weaving through the morning light that fell from the high windows like judgment from a god who had stopped caring. Advisors in dark robes, generals in formal armor, merchants who had bought their way into court with gold and promises. And there, on the dais, Emperor Cedric Valmont sat on the throne that had been half hers, deep in conversation with Lord Corwin Holt, Seraphine's father. Evelyn walked forward. Her footsteps echoed. Still, no one turned. She reached the edge of the dais, 10 feet from the throne. Close enough to speak. Close enough to be heard. Cedric's eyes slid past her like she was a servant waiting for dismissal. Lord Holt didn't even pretend. He looked directly at her and continued talking as if the space she occupied contained nothing but air. Something cold settled into Evelyn's chest. Not anger. Anger was hot and stupid and easy to counter. This was colder, sharper. The kind of cold that turned water into weapons. She had been queen of this empire for 12 years. She had negotiated treaties with foreign kings while Cedric learned which fork to use at state dinners. She had stopped 2 civil wars before they started by knowing which generals to promote and which to quietly remove. She had balanced the royal treasury when Cedric's father left it bleeding and broken. And now she stood in the throne room she had saved, invisible. Evelyn turned and walked out. No one called her back. She didn't expect them to. The Eastern Wing Library had become her kingdom. Smaller than the Grand Library in the Western Wing, but older. The books here predated the Empire itself, leather-bound records of wars and treaties and betrayals that made the current court look like children playing with wooden swords. Evelyn sat at the long table, documents spread before her like a battle map. Because that's what they were. She had spent 6 months watching, listening, collecting pieces of a puzzle that everyone assumed she was too irrelevant to solve. The Empire's treasury reports, grain shipments from the southern provinces, military deployment orders, marriage contracts between noble houses, letters between Lord Holt and the Emperor that somehow found their way to her through servants who still remembered when she had protected them from being discarded like broken tools. Patterns emerged, ugly ones. Lord Holt wasn't just positioning his daughter to become empress. He was positioning himself to become the power behind a weakened throne. His armies had been quietly reinforced over the past year. His trade agreements with the Eastern kingdoms bypassed the royal tariffs. His loans to struggling noble houses came with clauses that gave him control of their lands if they defaulted. And Cedric either didn't see it or didn't care, too drunk on the fantasy of a young woman who made him feel like the emperor he had always wanted to be instead of the one he actually was. Evelyn traced her finger across a deployment order. 3 legions moved to the northern border under the premise of defending against raiders. But the raider attacks had stopped 8 months ago. Those legions weren't defending anything. They were being positioned. For what? A coup seemed too obvious. Cedric was weak, but he was still the emperor, still protected by the Imperial Guard, still bound by oaths that most of the military took seriously. Unless those oaths could be broken. Unless the emperor could be made to look like a threat to the empire itself. Unless someone more competent could be offered as an alternative. The door opened behind her. Evelyn didn't turn. She knew the footsteps. Captain Thorne crossed the library in 4 strides and stopped at the edge of the table, standing at attention out of habit, even though she had released him from formal service 2 months ago when his position became untenable. Marcus Thorne, 41. Scarred face from a border war most people had forgotten, eyes that saw too much and said too little. The only member of her personal guard who had refused to abandon his post even after the Emperor stopped paying him. "You're still here," Evelyn said. "Where else would I be?" "Somewhere you get paid." "Money's temporary. Loyalty isn't." She finally looked up at him. "Loyalty to what? A queen no one acknowledges? Loyalty to the woman who kept this empire from eating itself while everyone else was too busy fighting over the scraps." Evelyn leaned back. "That woman doesn't exist anymore, Marcus. She's been erased." "No." Thorne moved closer, his voice dropping. "She's been underestimated. There's a difference." "Is there?" "You're still breathing. That means they're still afraid of you. They just don't know it yet." Evelyn studied him. Thorne was one of the few people in the palace who still looked at her like she mattered, and she couldn't decide if that made him loyal or insane. Maybe both. "I need you to do something for me," she said. "Name it." "Find General Aldrich." Thorne's expression didn't change, but his silence said everything. General Aldrich had been exiled 3 years ago after opposing one of Cedric's campaigns. The official story was that Aldrich had retired to his family estate. The truth was that Cedric had forced him out for being too competent, too respected, too dangerous to keep close. "He won't come back," Thorne said. "Not for the Emperor." "I'm not asking for the Emperor." Understanding flickered across Thorne's face. "You're building something." "I'm preparing for something." Evelyn gathered the documents on the table, her movements precise. "They think I'm harmless because I'm quiet. They think I'm defeated because I don't fight back. But you don't survive 12 years in this palace by being weak, Marcus. You survive by being patient, by watching your enemies destroy themselves while they forget you're still holding the knife." "What do you need Aldrich for?" "Insurance." "Against what?" Evelyn met his eyes. "Against the day when patience runs out." The assassination attempt came 3 nights later. Evelyn had been expecting it. Not the timing, not the method, but the inevitability. You don't become invisible in a palace without someone deciding to make that invisibility permanent. She woke to silence. Not the normal silence of the Eastern Wing, but the kind of silence that meant something had been removed from the world. A sound that should have been there, but wasn't. The guard who usually stood outside her door, his breathing, his occasional shift of weight. Gone. Evelyn didn't move. She lay in bed, eyes open, listening to the darkness. Footsteps. Soft. Professional. Moving down the corridor outside her chambers. Her hand found the knife under her pillow. A wedding gift from her father, back when she still believed marriage was about partnership instead of slow-motion warfare. The blade was short and sharp, and had never been used for anything except opening letters until tonight. The door opened. No knock, no announcement, just the slow press of wood against stone as someone entered who had no right to be there. Evelyn counted heartbeats. 3, 4, 5. Then she moved. She rolled from the bed as a shadow crossed the space where her head had been, something sharp hissing through empty air. Her knife came up and caught moonlight as she spun, driving the blade toward the figure's side. Metal hit metal. Her attacker had armor under their cloak. Professional. Prepared. They were faster than she expected. A fist caught her in the ribs, knocking air from her lungs and sending her stumbling back against the wall. Pain exploded across her side, but she kept the knife up, kept moving, because stopping meant dying, and she had not survived 12 years of this palace to die in the dark, like something shameful. The attacker came again. Evelyn saw the blade this time, saw it coming for her throat, and she did the only thing she could do. She dropped low, let the blade pass over her, and drove her own knife up into the gap between armor plates at the attacker's hip. The scream was female. Blood hit Evelyn's hand, hot and fast, and she twisted the blade before pulling it free. The attacker stumbled back, clutching the wound, and Evelyn lunged forward with everything she had left. They went down together, crashing into a table that shattered under their combined weight. Evelyn ended up on top, knife pressed against the attacker's throat, close enough to see the woman's face in the moonlight streaming through the window. Young, maybe 25, eyes wide with pain and fear and something else, resignation, like she had known this might happen and accepted it as the price of failure. "Who sent you?" Evelyn said. The woman's lips moved, but no sound came out. Blood pooled beneath them, spreading across the broken floor. "Who sent you?" Evelyn repeated, pressing the knife harder. "It doesn't matter." The woman's voice was barely a whisper. "You're already dead. They'll just send someone better next time." "Who?" But the woman's eyes were already glazing over, focus fading, life running out faster than Evelyn could stop it. She died without answering. Evelyn sat back, blood on her hands and her nightgown and her face. Her ribs screamed where the punch had landed. Her hands shook from adrenaline that had nowhere left to go. The guard who should have been outside her door was probably dead. The woman on her floor was definitely dead. And somewhere in this palace, someone was waiting to hear that the forgotten queen had finally stopped being a problem. The door burst open. Thorne stood in the doorway, sword drawn, taking in the scene with the kind of calm that came from seeing too much violence to be surprised by it anymore. "I heard the scream," he said. "Not mine." He moved to the body, checked for pulse out of habit, then looked back at Evelyn. "We need to move you, now. If one came, others might follow." "No." "Your Majesty—" "Oh." I said no. Evelyn stood, wincing at the pain in her ribs. "Moving means running. Running means admitting I'm prey. I'm done being prey, Marcus." "Then what do you want to do?" Evelyn looked down at the dead woman on her floor. Someone's daughter. Someone's weapon. Someone's mistake. "I want to know who thinks I'm worth killing." Mount. The answer came faster than she expected. By morning, 3 servants had disappeared. The guard outside her door had been found in a storage room with his throat cut, and a letter had been delivered to her chambers by a child who claimed a hooded figure had paid him a silver coin to bring it to the eastern wing. The letter had no signature, no seal, just words written in careful script that made Evelyn's blood turn to ice water. "You were warned to stay quiet. The next attempt will not fail." She read it 3 times. Then she burned it in the fireplace and watched the words turn to ash, while her mind worked through implications like a blade through rotted wood. Warned, past tense, which meant someone had already tried to make her disappear quietly, through exile or irrelevance or slow erasure. And when that hadn't worked, when she had refused to simply fade away, they had escalated. But who? Cedric? Possible, but unlikely. Her husband was weak and vain, but he wasn't murderous. He wanted her gone, not dead. Death would make her a martyr. Absence just made her pathetic. Lord Holt? More likely. A man positioning himself to control the empire couldn't afford a legitimate queen in the background, someone with an actual claim and actual competence. As long as Eveline existed, she was a threat to whatever puppet show he was planning. Seraphine? The girl was ambitious but young. Did she have the stomach for assassination? Did she have the connections? Or was it someone else entirely? Some enemy Eveline had made years ago when she actually had power, someone who saw her current weakness as an opportunity for revenge. Too many possibilities. Not enough evidence. Thorne entered without knocking. He'd stopped bothering with formality after last night. Aldrich sent word, he said. He'll meet you, but not here. Too many eyes. Where? The old fortress at Ravenmoor, 2 days north, neutral ground. Eveline nodded. Ravenmoor had been abandoned for a decade, left to rot after the last war. Perfect place for a conversation that couldn't happen. When? 3 days from now. He'll bring 2 of his officers, men he trusts. And can I trust him? Thorne's expression was unreadable. He's one of the few generals who ever respected you more than the Emperor. Make of that what you will. Fair enough. Arrange horses, Eveline said. Small escort. Nothing that draws attention. You're taking a risk leaving the palace. I'm taking a risk staying in it. Someone just tried to kill me in my own bed, Marcus. The Eastern Wing isn't protection anymore. It's a cage. And cages are only useful if the thing inside them stops fighting. She walked to the window looking out over the palace grounds where spring had started turning the gardens green again. Somewhere out there, her husband was probably having breakfast with his advisors, making decisions about an empire he barely understood. Somewhere out there, Seraphine was probably practicing her innocent smile in a mirror. Somewhere out there, an assassin was sharpening a blade with Eveline's name on it. Let them. Because the woman they were trying to kill wasn't the woman they thought she was anymore. That woman had died 6 months ago when the last servant stopped answering her bell. The woman standing at this window was something colder, something angrier, something that had been forged in abandonment and tempered in assassination attempts. The woman standing at this window had finally remembered what her father told her the day she left for the capital to marry an emperor she'd never met. Power isn't given, Eveline. It's taken. And the ones who take it are the ones who understand that mercy is just another word for weakness until you're strong enough to make it mean something else. She hadn't understood then. She'd been 19 and idealistic and stupid enough to think love conquered everything. Now she understood perfectly. Get me a list, she told Thorne. Of what? Everyone who benefits if I die. Everyone who loses if I stay alive. Everyone who's been promoted in the last 6 months. Everyone who's gained access to the Emperor. Everyone who owes money to Lord Holt. Everyone who's sleeping with someone they shouldn't be. I want names, Marcus. I want connections. I want to know which threads hold this court together so I know exactly which ones to cut when the time comes. Thorne didn't move for a moment. Then he nodded slowly. You're going to war. No. Eveline turned from the window and her eyes held something that made even Thorne take half a step back. I'm already at war. I just stopped pretending I wasn't. The ride to Ravenmoor took 2 days through territories Eveline hadn't seen since before her marriage. Villages where people still worked the land like their grandparents had, where empire politics were distant thunder that sometimes brought storms and sometimes brought nothing. She traveled in plain clothes with a hood pulled low, accompanied by Thorne and 2 guards he swore would die before betraying her. The kind of loyalty that couldn't be bought, only earned through years of proving you gave a damn about the people who bled for you. They reached the fortress at dusk on the 3rd day. Ravenmoor sat on a hill overlooking a valley that had seen 3 different kingdoms rise and fall. The walls were crumbling but still tall. The gates hung crooked but still stood, a monument to the permanence of violence and the temporary nature of victory. General Aldrich was waiting in what used to be the Great Hall, now open to the sky where the roof had collapsed years ago. He stood with his back to them, studying the valley below like he was reading a book written in dirt and blood. He turned as they approached. Aldrich was 60, with white hair and a face like weathered stone. His body still carried the posture of a soldier, even though he hadn't commanded an army in 3 years, eyes that had watched men die and made the decisions that killed them. He looked at Eveline for a long moment. Then he bowed. Not the shallow court bow that meant nothing. The deep bow of genuine respect. Your Majesty. The words hit Evelyn harder than she expected. No one had called her that in months. No one had bowed in longer. General? You look like hell. Despite everything, Evelyn almost smiled. I've had a difficult week. I heard someone tried to make you disappear permanently. News traveled fast, even to exiled generals. They failed. This time, Aldrich gestured to the two officers standing behind him. You remember Commanders Reeves and Castellan? She did. Both had served under Aldrich during the border campaigns. Both had been loyal to the Empire when the Empire still meant something beyond one man's vanity. Thorne says you're gathering allies, Aldrich continued. Against what? Against whatever's coming. Evelyn moved to the edge of the hall, looking out at the darkening valley. The Empire is being carved up from the inside, General. Lord Holt is positioning himself to control the throne. My husband is too blind or too stupid to see it, and I'm the only inconvenient piece left on the board that doesn't fit their new game. So you want me to help you remove them? I want you to help me survive them. There's a difference. Aldrich was quiet for a moment. What makes you think I'm interested in court politics anymore? I left that world. It left me. We're done with each other. Are you? Evelyn turned to face him. Because from where I'm standing, you look like a man who still cares about what happens to the Empire, even if the Empire stopped caring about you. You look like a man who spent 30 years building something only to watch it get sold off piece by piece to the highest bidder. You look like a man who knows the difference between a leader and a coward, and you're watching a coward destroy everything you fought for. Careful, Your Majesty. That sounds like treason. Only if you think the Empire and the Emperor are the same thing. I don't. Do you? Silence. Heavy and loaded. Then Aldrich laughed. It was a harsh sound, bitter and genuine. You've changed. I've learned. What? That the palace doesn't reward loyalty. It punishes it. That power respects violence more than virtue. That the only way to survive in a world designed to erase you is to become something they can't erase. She paused. I was a good queen, General. I played by rules I thought mattered. I believed competence would be rewarded and honor would be recognized. I was wrong. So now I'm going to be something else. What? Necessary. Aldrich studied her with those cold soldier's eyes that had evaluated 1,000 battlefields. Finally, he nodded. What do you need? Information. Connections. Men I can trust if everything goes wrong. And what do I get? The satisfaction of knowing you didn't let the Empire fall because you were too proud to help the woman they tried to make you forget about. Another pause. Then Aldrich extended his hand. Evelyn took it. I can give you 3 officers, he said. Good men. Loyal to the Empire, not the throne. They'll feed you intelligence on military movements, on which generals are being bought, on where the real power is flowing. But I can't promise they'll fight for you when the moment comes. That decision will be theirs. Fair enough. And Evelyn? He used her name instead of her title, a familiarity that somehow felt more respectful than any formal address. Whatever you're planning, be careful. Courts eat people like us, the ones who still believe in something. I stopped believing in things, General. Now I just believe in survival. She left Ravenmoor as the moon rose, riding back toward a palace that wanted her dead, and an empire that had forgotten her name. But she wasn't forgotten anymore. She was being remembered, and that was infinitely more dangerous. The return journey took them through a village called Thorn Hollow, a place so small it barely appeared on maps. They stopped for fresh horses and food, planning to stay only an hour before pushing on. That's when Evelyn saw her. The girl couldn't have been more than 9, standing in the village square with a woman who was probably her mother. Both wore clothes patched too many times to count. Both looked hungry in that permanent way that came from years of not having enough. The girl was staring at Evelyn with huge eyes, the kind of stare that saw through disguises and recognized something underneath. Evelyn dismounted and walked over. Thorne tensed but didn't stop her. What's your name? Evelyn asked. The girl didn't answer, just kept staring. The mother grabbed her daughter's shoulder. Forgive her, my lady. She doesn't mean to be rude. She's not being rude. She's being observant. Evelyn crouched down to the girl's level. You know who I am. The girl nodded slowly. How? My gran showed me a coin once, an old one. said it had the real queen on it, said the real queen cared about people like us. Eveline felt something crack in her chest. She pulled back her hood, letting the girl see her face clearly. Your gran was right. Are you still the queen? The question hit harder than any accusation. Are you still? As if queenship was something that could be lost through abandonment. As if titles meant nothing when no one acknowledged them. Yes, Eveline said. And as she said it, she realized it was true. Not because anyone called her queen, but because she had decided that being erased didn't make her less. It just made everyone else blind. Then why are you here and not in the palace? Because sometimes queens have to leave the palace to remember what they're supposed to be protecting. The girl seemed to accept this. Then she did something unexpected. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small wooden bird, carved and worn smooth from handling. My da made this before he died. Gran says it's supposed to bring luck. She held it out. You can have it. You look like you need luck more than me. Eveline took the wooden bird, feeling its weight in her palm. A child's treasure, offered freely. What's your name? She asked again. Elara. Thank you, Elara. Eveline stood, tucking the bird into her pocket. When you're older, remember this. Remember that queens are just people, and people can be broken or they can be dangerous, but they can't be both at the same time. You have to choose. She left a gold coin with the mother, more money than the village probably saw in a year, and rode away before the woman could refuse it. Thorn rode up beside her. That was reckless. Probably. If word spreads that the queen is traveling in common clothes, let it spread. Eveline's hand touched the wooden bird in her pocket. Let them know I'm still alive. Let them know I'm still paying attention. Let them wonder what I'm doing and who I'm talking to. Fear is useful, Marcus, and right now I want the people who tried to kill me to be very, very afraid. They rode through the night, pushing hard, arriving at the palace just before dawn. The eastern wing welcomed her back with its familiar emptiness. Her chambers looked exactly as she'd left them, except for one thing. Another letter. This one was different, sealed with wax, marked with a symbol she didn't recognize, a serpent eating its own tail. She opened it. We know where you went. We know who you spoke with. General Aldrich will be dead within the week. Captain Thorn will follow. And when you have no one left, when you're truly alone, we'll come for you again. This time there will be no mistakes. Stop fighting. Accept what you've become. Disappear quietly, and we'll let you live. Eveline read it twice. Then she carried it to the fireplace. But she didn't burn it. Instead, she pinned it to the wall above her desk, where she would see it every morning when she woke up. A reminder. A declaration. A promise to herself that quiet was no longer an option. Because they had made their first real mistake. They had threatened the only people she had left. And queens who had nothing left to lose were the most dangerous creatures in any empire. The next morning, Eveline did something she hadn't done in 6 months. She requested an audience with the emperor. The request was denied. She requested again. Denied. On the third request, a messenger arrived with a note from Lord Corwin Holt himself, written in the kind of casual cruelty that came naturally to men who thought they'd already won. The emperor has no time for ghosts. Perhaps you should consider retiring to the countryside. I hear the southern estates are lovely this time of year. Eveline smiled when she read it, because Lord Holt had just confirmed everything she suspected. He wasn't just positioning his daughter. He was actively managing who had access to Cedric, who got heard, who mattered. The emperor had become a puppet, and Holt was fitting his hand deeper into the strings, which meant Cedric was either complicit or completely blind. Either way, he was no longer her husband in any way that mattered. He was just another obstacle. Eveline spent the next week doing what she did best. She listened. She watched. She collected pieces. Servants still came to her sometimes, the ones who remembered when she had protected them from being discarded. They brought gossip, rumors, whispers from the western wing where power actually moved. Lord Holt had been meeting with General Marcus, commander of the Imperial Guard. Seraphine had been seen in private conversation with the Empire's treasurer. 3 noble houses had suddenly paid off massive debts, their loans mysteriously forgiven by creditors who all happened to do business with Holt Enterprises. And Cedric had signed a new decree, quietly, without announcement. A decree that stripped queens of their independent authority over royal matters. A decree that made the emperor's word absolute and final. A decree that erased Evelyn from power officially, even though she'd already been erased in every practical way. Thorne brought her the document personally, his face grim. He's making sure you can't claim regency if something happens to him, or he's making sure I can't challenge whatever comes next. Evelyn read through the decree, her mind working through implications like a knife through silk. This isn't Cedric's language. He doesn't write like this. Someone drafted this for him. Holt. Obviously. What are you going to do? Evelyn set the document down and looked at Thorne with eyes that had gone cold and sharp. I'm going to remind them why they should have killed me when they had the chance. Chuck. The Winter Assembly was 2 months away. The largest gathering of the Empire's nobility, where alliances were announced and policies were declared, and the illusion of unified power was displayed for all the provinces to see. It was also where Cedric planned to make his move. Evelyn knew this because one of Aldrich's officers had intercepted correspondence between Holt and a magistrate in the capital. The letters talked about timing, about announcements, about making sure certain legal documents were prepared before the assembly. Divorce documents. Cedric was going to strip her of the title officially, in front of the entire empire, a public execution without the dignity of actual death. And then he would announce his intention to marry Seraphine Holt, binding the imperial line to the Holt family forever. Evelyn sat in her library, surrounded by documents and maps and lists of names, and she realized something that should have terrified her, but instead felt liberating. She had 2 months to destroy them, 2 months to gather everything she needed. 2 months to build a case so overwhelming that even the nobles who had abandoned her would have to acknowledge she'd been right all along. 2 months to become dangerous. She started with the treasury. One of her old contacts, a clerk named Devon, who still owed her a favor from years ago when she'd saved his position during a purge, provided her with copies of financial records. Secret records. The ones that showed where money actually went versus where it was supposed to go. The numbers told a story that made Evelyn's blood burn cold. For the past 3 years, millions in royal funds had been diverted. Not stolen, exactly. Redirected. Into accounts controlled by a web of shell companies that all traced back to enterprises owned by the Holt family. Roads that were supposed to be built never got built, but the money disappeared. Military contracts that should have gone to competitive bidding went to Holt suppliers at inflated prices. Grain reserves that were supposed to feed provinces during harsh winters somehow ended up in Holt warehouses, sold back to the Empire at premium rates. It was brilliant in its complexity, too subtle for Cedric to notice, too distributed for any single auditor to catch the pattern. But Evelyn saw it, because she had always been better at this than her husband. She spent 3 weeks documenting everything, building a web of evidence that connected Holt to systematic theft of imperial resources. Then she did something more dangerous. She sent copies to 5 different magistrates across the empire, men who still believed in law more than politics, men who couldn't be easily silenced. And she waited. The response came faster than expected. Magistrate Corin, from the eastern provinces, sent word through encrypted channels that he was opening a formal investigation. 2 other magistrates followed. Suddenly, the Holt family wasn't just positioning for power. They were defending against accusations of corruption that threatened to destroy everything they'd built. Lord Holt's response was predictable. 3 days after the magistrates announced their investigations, a proclamation went out from the palace, signed by the emperor himself. Recent accusations against loyal servants of the empire are baseless and politically motivated. Any investigation will be conducted through proper imperial channels, under the oversight of the emperor's appointed advisors. Translation: we're investigating ourselves and finding nothing wrong, but the damage was done. Nobles were talking, questions were being asked. The illusion of Holt's untouchable position had cracked, and Evelyn, in her forgotten eastern wing, smiled like a blade being sharpened, because she wasn't done. Not even close. Ishoki. The second attack came 5 weeks before the Winter Assembly. This time they didn't send an assassin to her chambers. They poisoned her food. Evelyn had been expecting something. Thorne had insisted on having everything she ate tested by a taster first, A young soldier named Kern who had volunteered because he said he owed her a debt from when she'd granted clemency to his brother years ago. The poison was in this wine, a slow-acting toxin that would have taken days to kill her, making it look like natural illness. Plausible deniability. Kern took a single sip during the testing and collapsed within an hour. He survived. Barely. 3 days of fever and seizures before the royal physicians managed to flush the poison from his system. Evelyn sat beside his bed during the worst of it, watching a man who had nothing to gain and everything to lose suffer because he'd been loyal to a queen no one acknowledged. When he finally woke, his first words were an apology. "I'm sorry, Your Majesty. I should have caught it sooner. You saved my life, Kern. I almost died doing it." "Yes." Evelyn's voice was quiet. "You almost died because someone in this palace decided I wasn't worth letting live. And I will find out who. And when I do, they will learn exactly what happens when you target the people I care about." She meant it. The investigation into who had access to her food was brutal and efficient. Thorne interrogated every servant, every cook, every guard who had been anywhere near the Eastern Wing kitchens that day. Most claimed ignorance. A few lied badly enough that Thorne caught them. And one, a kitchen boy named Tim, broke completely under questioning. He'd been paid 20 gold pieces, more money than his family would see in 5 years. All he had to do was add a vial of clear liquid to the wine meant for the queen's chambers. The man who paid him had worn a hooded cloak. But Tim remembered one detail, a ring on his hand, gold with a serpent design, the same symbol from the threatening letter. Evelyn stood in the interrogation room, looking down at the terrified boy who had nearly killed her for money he probably would never have been allowed to keep anyway. "Who gave you the ring description?" she asked. "I don't know. I swear, I just saw it when he handed me the coins." "What else did you see?" "Nothing. Just his hand, just the ring." "Think harder." Evelyn's voice went cold. "Because right now you're an attempted murderer. But if you give me something useful, you're a witness. Witnesses don't hang. Murderers do." Tim's face went white. He had a scar on his wrist, shaped like a burn mark." "Which hand?" "Left." Evelyn looked at Thorne. They both knew what that meant. A burn scar on the left wrist was the mark of certain military units, a ritual branding during training. Not common anymore, but older soldiers still carried them. Someone with military training, someone with access to money, someone connected to the serpent symbol. The pieces were coming together, and they all pointed toward the same place. 1 month before the Winter Assembly, General Marcus made a mistake. He visited the Eastern Wing. It was brief, professional. He claimed he was conducting a routine security inspection of the entire palace, making sure all areas were properly guarded. But his eyes lingered too long on Evelyn when they passed in the corridor, and when he clasped his hands behind his back, she saw it. Left wrist. Burn scar. Exactly where Time had described. Evelyn said nothing, smiled politely, let him finish his inspection, and leave. Then she called an emergency meeting with Thorne and Aldrich's officers. "Marcus," she said simply, "the Imperial Guard commander is working with Holt." The implications exploded across the table. If Marcus was compromised, then the Emperor's personal security was compromised, which meant Cedric was surrounded by people loyal to Holt, not the throne. Which meant when the Winter Assembly came, when Cedric tried to publicly divorce Evelyn and marry Seraphine, there would be no one to stop it, unless Evelyn stopped it first. "We need proof," Commander Reeves said. "Catching him with poison on his hands would be ideal, but we don't need to catch him with poison." Evelyn's mind was racing, pieces clicking into place. "We need to make him reveal himself." "How?" She smiled. It was not a kind smile. "By giving him exactly what he wants." Quotes. The letter went out 3 days later, carried by a messenger Evelyn trusted absolutely. It was addressed to Lord Corwin Holt, written in Evelyn's own hand, and it said exactly what he'd been waiting to hear. "I accept your terms. I will leave quietly. No resistance. No public challenge. I want only safe passage to the southern estates and a pension sufficient to live in dignity. In return, I will sign whatever documents are necessary to dissolve my marriage and relinquish all claims to the throne. I have been defeated. You have won. Let us end this without further bloodshed." The response came within a day. Lord Holt agreed to her terms. A meeting would be arranged, documents would be prepared, everything would be handled discreetly, and Evelyn would finally disappear, exactly as planned. Except it wasn't Holt's plan anymore. It was hers. The meeting was set for 2 weeks before the winter assembly. Neutral location, Holt's manor outside the capital. Just Evelyn, Thorne, and whatever witnesses Holt deemed necessary to make the signing legal. Evelyn spent those 2 weeks preparing, not for surrender, for war. She gathered every piece of evidence she'd collected over the past months, the financial documents, the testimony from servants, the poison investigation, the connections between Marcus and Holt, everything. And she made copies, dozens of them, distributed to people across the empire who could be trusted to release them if anything happened to her. Insurance against the final assassination attempt she knew was coming, because Lord Holt wasn't going to let her live. Even if she signed everything, even if she walked away quietly, she knew too much. She'd become too dangerous. The meeting at his manor would be her execution, dressed up as a negotiation. But Evelyn had no intention of dying. She had every intention of burning his entire world down. The night before the meeting, Evelyn stood in her chambers, dressed in the black traveling cloak she'd worn to meet Aldrich months ago. Thorne waited by the door. "You don't have to do this," he said. "Yes, I do." "He's going to try to kill you." "I know." "Then why, Because running isn't winning." Evelyn turned to face him. "I could disappear. I could take the pension and live quietly and survive. But surviving isn't enough anymore, Marcus. I want them to regret ever thinking I was weak. I want them to wake up every day for the rest of their lives knowing they created the woman who destroyed them." "That sounds like revenge." "It is. But it's also justice. For every servant they discarded, for every province they stole from, for every person in this empire who believed loyalty and competence mattered only to watch corruption get rewarded instead." She paused. "This isn't about me anymore. It's about showing everyone that the system that tried to erase me is broken. And broken things don't get fixed, they get replaced." Thorne studied her for a long moment. Then he drew his sword and knelt. "Then I'm with you. Until the end. Get up, Marcus. Queens don't need people kneeling. They need people standing beside them." He stood. And together they walked out of the eastern wing, leaving behind the woman who had been forgotten. The woman walking through those corridors now was something else entirely. Something forged in betrayal and sharpened by survival. Something the Empire was about to meet for the very first time. Mutz. They reached Holt's manor at dusk. It sat on a hill overlooking the capital, massive and elegant and designed to make everyone who approached it feel small. Evelyn felt nothing. Guards lined the entrance, too many for a simple negotiation. Thorne's hand moved to his sword. "Easy," Evelyn murmured. "We knew this was coming." They were escorted inside. Through marble halls and past tapestries depicting Holt family victories in wars Evelyn knew they'd barely participated in. The architecture of ego. Lord Holt waited in his study, a room of dark wood and darker ambitions. He stood as she entered, offering a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Your Majesty, I'm glad you've come to your senses." "I'm glad we can resolve this peacefully," Evelyn replied, her voice steady. "As am I. Please sit. We have documents to review." Evelyn sat. Thorne remained standing behind her, a silent threat Holt ignored. The documents were spread across the desk. Dissolution of marriage, relinquishment of title, transfer of properties, everything legal and official and designed to erase her permanently. "I assume everything is in order?" Holt asked. "I'd like to read them first." "Of course." Evelyn took her time, reading every line, looking for traps, finding several, clauses that would strip her of all assets, requirements that she never speak publicly about palace matters, penalties for violating the terms that included imprisonment. They weren't offering her exile. They were offering her a lifetime of enforced silence, backed by legal threats that would follow her forever. She looked up at Holt. "This isn't what we agreed to, isn't it?" His smile sharpened. "You wanted safe passage and a pension. These documents provide that. The other clauses are simply insurance, to protect everyone involved. To protect you, you mean? Semantics. Evelyn set the documents down. I'm not signing this. The room went very still. Holt's smile didn't change, but his eyes went cold. That would be unwise. Would it? You came here to negotiate. No. Evelyn stood. I came here to see if you'd actually try to kill me yourself, or if you'd hide behind hired killers again. Now I have my answer. Holt's hand moved to the bell on his desk, but Thorne's sword was already drawn, the point hovering an inch from Holt's throat. Don't, Thorne said quietly. The door behind them burst open. 6 guards poured in, weapons drawn. But they stopped, because standing in the doorway behind them was General Aldrich, flanked by 20 soldiers in armor that bore the old Empire's crest. Not the Emperor's personal guard, the provincial military, men who answered to generals, not politicians. Aldrich smiled. It was not a friendly expression. Lord Holt, I believe you're under arrest. What? On what grounds? Holt's voice was steady, but his face had gone pale. Theft of imperial resources, conspiracy to commit murder, treason. Aldrich stepped forward, and his soldiers moved with him, surrounding Holt's guards until weapons were lowered through sheer overwhelming presence. Would you like me to continue? I have 17 formal charges prepared by 3 different magistrates. The Emperor has already been informed. Evelyn's voice cut through his protests like a blade through silk. Informed by me. With evidence. With testimony. With everything you thought I was too broken to gather. She pulled a sealed document from her cloak and set it on the desk. The imperial seal gleamed in the lamplight. That is an order signed by His Majesty this morning, authorizing a full investigation into your financial dealings and your connections to the attempts on my life. You see, Lord Holt, even weak emperors get angry when they discover they've been made into puppets, especially when that discovery comes with proof their advisors have been stealing from them for years. Holt stared at the document like it was a venomous snake. You're lying. Am I? Evelyn leaned forward. Test me. Ring that bell. See what happens when your guards discover their wages have been paid by a treasury you've been systematically emptying. See how loyal they remain when they learn you were planning to collapse the Empire's economy and blame it on the Emperor's incompetence. Silence. Then Holt did something unexpected. He laughed. It was a harsh, bitter sound. You think you've won. You think this changes anything. His eyes met Evelyn's, and there was something feral in them now. Something cornered and dangerous. You're still the forgotten queen. Still the woman they tried to erase. Even if I fall, even if everything I built burns, you'll never be what you were. The court will never... I don't want what I was. Evelyn's voice was steel. I want something better. I want an empire that doesn't reward men like you, where competence matters more than manipulation, where the strong protect the weak instead of devouring them. You thought you were building a kingdom. You were just proving the system was rotten enough that someone needed to burn it down and start over. You can't... I already have. She gestured to Aldrich, who stepped forward with iron manacles. Lord Corwin Holt, one of the most powerful men in the Empire, was arrested in his own study while his guards stood frozen, uncertain who to follow. The answer came when Aldrich's soldiers moved forward with quiet efficiency, and not a single one of Holt's men drew their weapon, because everyone in that room suddenly understood which way the Empire was turning, and it wasn't toward the man in chains. But as they prepared to leave, as victory crystallized into reality, one of Aldrich's officers burst into the room with news that made Evelyn's blood turn to ice. General, Your Majesty, we just received word from the capital. What is it? Aldrich demanded. General Marcus has seized the palace. He's claiming the Emperor is unfit to rule. He's calling for an emergency session of the council to name a regent. The room exploded into chaos. When? Evelyn's voice cut through the noise. 2 hours ago. And the Emperor? Under house arrest in his chambers. Marcus claims it's for his own protection. Evelyn looked at Aldrich. Their eyes met. Marcus was making his move. With Holt captured and Evelyn away from the palace, he was seizing power directly. A coup disguised as a protective measure. And Seraphine? Where's Lady Seraphine Holt? Evelyn asked. The officer's face went grim. Reportedly standing beside Marcus, making statements about the Emperor's declining mental state, calling for stability. Of course. The assassination attempts, the poison, the threats, all of it had been Marcus, working with the Holt family but keeping his own cards hidden. When Holt fell, he simply accelerated his timeline. And now Cedric, weak, foolish Cedric, was a prisoner in his own palace while the woman he'd planned to marry helped overthrow him. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so catastrophic. How long before he consolidates control? Aldrich asked his officer. The council meets at dawn to vote on the regency. If Marcus has enough votes, he'll have enough, Eveline interrupted. Most of the council are men who benefited from Holt's corruption. They'll support Marcus rather than face investigation themselves. Then we're out of time. No! Eveline's mind was already moving, racing through scenarios and possibilities. We have until dawn. That's 8 hours. 8 hours to do what? Eveline turned to face everyone in the room. Aldrich, Thorne, the soldiers, the captured Holt. 8 hours to take back the Empire. The ride back to the capital was hell on horseback. 8 hours. That's all they had before the council voted to make Marcus regent and turned a coup into something legal. Something permanent. Eveline pushed her horse harder than she should have, the animal's breath coming in ragged gasps that matched her own. Behind her, Aldrich rode with 20 men, the only soldiers they could muster on short notice. 20 against the entire Imperial Guard. The math didn't work. But math had stopped mattering the moment Eveline realized she was either going to die trying or die doing nothing, and at least one of those options meant something. Thorne pulled up alongside her as they crossed into the outer districts of the capital. The streets were empty, too empty. People knew something was wrong. They always knew before the official word came down. You could smell a coup the way you could smell smoke before you saw fire. "We need a plan," Thorne said. "I have a plan." "What is it?" "Get inside the palace before dawn." "That's not a plan. That's a goal." "Then help me turn it into a plan." Thorne was quiet for 3 strides. Then he said what they were both thinking. "Marcus has 300 men inside those walls. Even if half of them are uncertain about this, that's still 150 swords between us and the Emperor. We go through the main gate, we die. We try to sneak in, we get caught, and we die. We wait for backup, the council votes, and we're too late. There's no version of this where we win clean. Good thing I stopped caring about clean." They reached the outer wall as the moon hit its peak. The palace loomed ahead, lit from within like a predator's den. Every window glowed, every tower bristled with guards. Marcus had locked it down tight. Eveline pulled her horse to a stop in the shadow of a merchant's warehouse, far enough from the gate to avoid immediate attention. Aldrich's men formed up around them, faces grim. They knew the odds. They came anyway. That had to count for something. Aldrich dismounted and approached Eveline, his expression unreadable in the darkness. "Your Majesty, I need to know what you're actually planning here. Because if this is a suicide run, I need to tell my men so they can make peace with whatever gods they still believe in." "It's not suicide." "Then what is it?" Eveline looked at the palace, at the walls she had walked for 12 years, at the throne room where she'd been erased, at the eastern wing where she'd learned what it meant to be forgotten. "It's a resurrection." She turned to face them all. 20 soldiers, Thorne, Aldrich, men who had nothing to gain from following a forgotten queen except the satisfaction of doing something right in an empire that rewarded wrong. Marcus thinks he's won because he controls the palace, but palaces are just buildings. Empires are people. And the people in that building right now are terrified. Servants who don't know if they'll be purged, guards who don't know if their oaths still matter. Nobles who are realizing the man holding the emperor hostage might decide their threats too. She paused, letting that sink in. Fear makes people desperate. Desperate people make mistakes. We're going to walk in there and offer them something Marcus can't. "What?" Aldrich asked. "A way out that doesn't end with them in chains or graves." "And how exactly do we walk in?" Eveline smiled. It was cold and sharp. "The same way I've survived everything else. By using the parts of the palace everyone forgets exist." The eastern wing had its own entrance. A servant's door built 3 generations ago when queens were expected to receive deliveries without bothering the main household. It had been locked for months, boarded up, declared structurally unsafe after Eveline's chambers had been moved there. Unsafe meant unwatched. They left the horses with two of Aldrich's men and approached on foot, keeping to shadows and side streets. The capital had a curfew now. Marcus's doing. Another sign that power had shifted and nobody was pretending otherwise. The servant's door was exactly where Evelyn remembered. Wood rotted at the base. Hinges rusted. The board nailed across it looked official but pulled free with barely any effort. Inside, darkness swallowed them whole. Evelyn led the way through corridors she'd walked 1,000 times, past storage rooms filled with forgotten furniture, past chambers where servants used to sleep before the eastern wing became a tomb for inconvenient royalty. The air smelled like dust and abandonment and something else, something that lived in places where hope went to die. They reached the main corridor. Light spilled from the western wing ahead, casting long shadows that moved with the rhythm of guards on patrol. Evelyn held up a hand. Everyone stopped. She could hear voices. 2 guards, maybe 3, stationed at the junction where east met west. Normal protocol. Except normally those guards would be protecting the palace from outside threats. Now they were keeping people in. Thorne moved up beside her, silent as death. "I can take them quietly," he whispered. "No, we need them talking, not bleeding." "Talking about what?" "About which side they'd rather be on when this is over." Evelyn stepped out of the shadows and into the light before Thorne could stop her. The guards saw her immediately. Hands went to weapons. 2 men in imperial armor, faces young and uncertain. "Stop right there," one of them said, his voice cracking slightly. "No one's allowed in the eastern wing." "I'm already in the eastern wing," Evelyn said calmly. "I live here, remember?" Recognition flickered across their faces. Confusion followed. They'd probably been told the queen was gone. Exiled. Dead. Pick whichever lie made the most sense. Now she stood in front of them, very much alive, and they didn't know what to do about it. "General Marcus gave orders." "General Marcus doesn't give me orders." Evelyn took a step forward. The guard stepped back. "I'm still the queen. And unless the emperor himself has dissolved that title in writing, you're still sworn to protect me. Not imprison me, protect me. The general said you were a threat to the empire." "Did he say why?" Silence. "Did he show you evidence? Did he explain what threat I pose? Or did he just tell you to follow orders and you followed them because that's easier than thinking?" The younger guard's hand wavered on his sword. "We're supposed to arrest anyone found in the eastern wing. Then arrest me." Evelyn held out her wrists. "Take me to the general. Let him explain to everyone in the throne room why he's detaining the emperor's wife without charges, without trial, without any authority except the one he gave himself when he decided laws don't matter anymore." The guards exchanged glances. Uncertain, afraid, exactly where she needed them. "Or," Evelyn continued, her voice dropping lower, "you can step aside. Let me pass. And when this is over, when people ask which side you were on, you can say you chose the empire over a traitor who's currently holding your emperor prisoner. We don't know he's a traitor? Then why did he arrest the emperor? For his protection. From what?" Evelyn's eyes went hard. "From me? I'm one woman in an empty wing with no army, no weapons, no power. If I'm the threat, why does Marcus need 300 men to feel safe? What's he really protecting, the emperor or himself?" The older guard's expression shifted. Something changed behind his eyes. Recognition of a truth he'd been avoiding. "Even if what you're saying is true," he said slowly, "we can't just let you pass. We have orders. Then follow them. Arrest me. But you're going to have to explain to every servant, every noble, every citizen of this empire why you chose a general who stages coups over a queen who's never drawn a sword against her own people." She waited. The moment stretched. Thin. Fragile. Then the older guard stepped aside. The younger one stared at him. "What are you doing?" "Making a choice while I still can." He looked at Evelyn. "The throne room is locked down, 50 guards inside. The emperor is in his chambers with another 20. Marcus is in the council hall with the nobles, making his case for regency. If you're planning something stupid, Your Majesty, now would be the time." "I'm planning something necessary. There's a difference." She moved past them. Thorne and Aldrich's men followed, weapons ready but not drawn. The guards watched them go. Neither raised an alarm. Small victories. They'd need a lot more before morning. Yeah. The palace interior was chaos wrapped in forced calm. Servants moved through hallways with their heads down, avoiding eye contact. Nobles clustered in small groups, whispering. Guards stood at every intersection, tense and watchful. Everyone knew something was breaking. No one knew which pieces would be left standing when it finished. Evelyn led her group through the back passages, using routes that servants traveled. Fewer guards, less attention. They passed the kitchens where Mira, her last remaining attendant, dropped a tray when she saw Evelyn alive. Your Majesty. Not now. Where's everyone gathered? The Great Hall. General Marcus called an assembly for the household staff, said there would be changes, said anyone caught helping enemies of the Empire would be executed. Enemies of the Empire. Meaning her. When? An hour ago. Which meant most of the palace staff were in one place. Contained, controlled, classic coup procedure. Gather everyone together so you know where the threats are. But it also meant Marcus had concentrated his attention in one direction while Evelyn came from another. Mira, I need you to do something for me. The girl's eyes went wide. Anything. Find every servant who still remembers I'm not the villain in this story. Tell them to spread the word. Queen Evelyn is in the palace. She's alive, and she's coming for the throne room. Tell them to be ready to move when the moment comes. Move where? Away from Marcus's men. Anyone loyal to him is about to have a very bad morning. Mira nodded and ran. Evelyn turned to Aldrich. You have men you trust absolutely? 10 of them. Send 5 to secure the exit routes from the council hall. I don't want any nobles running to warn Marcus before we're ready. The other 5 go to the barracks, find the soldiers who aren't sure about this coup, and give them a choice. Fight for Marcus and die, or stand down and live. And if they choose wrong? Then they chose wrong. Evelyn's voice was flat. I'm done being merciful to people who put ambition over loyalty. Anyone who draws a sword against us doesn't get a second chance. Aldrich studied her for a moment. Then he nodded and split his men off into their assigned groups. That left Evelyn with Thorn and 5 soldiers. 6 people to take the Emperor's chambers from 20 guards. The math still didn't work, but Evelyn had stopped caring about math. They reached the corridor leading to Cedric's chambers just as the eastern sky started showing the first gray hints of dawn. 4 hours until the council vote. Maybe less. 20 guards stood between them and the Emperor, professional, alert, loyal to Marcus or at least loyal to whoever signed their pay. No way through without bloodshed. Evelyn stepped forward anyway. The guards saw her. Weapons came up. A captain moved to the front, his hand raised to signal an attack. That's far enough. I want to see my husband. The Emperor is not receiving visitors. He's receiving me. Evelyn kept walking. Tell him his wife wants to discuss treason charges against General Marcus. Tell him I have proof. Tell him he has about 3 hours to decide if he's still an emperor or just a prisoner in fancy clothes. The Emperor is under protection. From me. Evelyn laughed. It was a harsh sound. I'm the only person in this palace who's been trying to save him. While Marcus was planning this coup, I was gathering evidence of the corruption bleeding this empire dry. While Lord Holt was positioning to control the throne, I was building alliances with the generals Cedric exiled for being too competent. Your general isn't protecting the Emperor, he's replacing him. And you're helping. The captain's expression didn't change, but his eyes flickered, uncertain. We have our orders. From a man who's holding your Emperor hostage. You understand that's treason, right? You understand that when this is over, everyone who helped Marcus is going to hang alongside him? He said you'd try to manipulate us. Of course he did, because the truth is manipulation when it threatens your story. Evelyn stopped 10 feet from the line of guards. Here's the truth. General Marcus has been working with Lord Holt to steal from the Imperial Treasury for 3 years. I have documents. I have testimony. I have proof that will destroy both of them. Marcus arrested the Emperor because I was about to expose everything. This isn't about protection, it's about survival. His survival. At the cost of every oath you ever swore. Silence. Heavy and dangerous. Then a voice came from behind the guards. Let her through. Everyone turned. Emperor Cedric Valmont stood in the doorway to his chambers, looking like he'd aged 10 years in the past 24 hours. His face was pale, his hands shook slightly, but his voice carried authority he hadn't shown in months. "Let my wife through," he repeated. The captain hesitated. "Your Majesty, General Marcus ordered—" "I don't care what Marcus ordered. I'm still the Emperor, and if I want to speak with my wife, I'll speak with my wife. Unless you plan to add kidnapping to your list of treasons this morning." The guards parted. Evelyn walked through them, Thorn at her side. The door closed behind them, leaving Aldrich's men in the corridor. Cedric stood in the center of his receiving room, surrounded by furniture that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. He looked small in it, diminished. He looked at Evelyn like he was seeing her for the first time in years. "You're alive." "Disappointed?" "No, He stopped, started again. "Marcus told me you'd fled the capital, that you were planning to raise an army against me." "And you believed him." "I didn't know what to believe. Everything's been falling apart. The Treasury investigations, the magistrates asking questions, Holt's arrest. Then Marcus said you were behind all of it, that you were trying to destroy the Empire to get revenge on me. And that seemed more likely than the idea that maybe your advisors were lying to you." Cedric flinched. "I didn't know who to trust. You could have trusted me. You stopped speaking to me months ago. You stopped seeing me months before that." Evelyn's voice was cold. "I became invisible, Cedric. You moved me to the Eastern Wing. You stopped inviting me to councils. You paraded Seraphine through the palace like she was already wearing my crown. What exactly was I supposed to say to you? How was I supposed to compete with a 23-year-old girl who made you feel like the emperor you always wanted to be instead of the one you actually are? That's not fair. Nothing about this is fair, but we don't have time for fair. We have maybe 3 hours before Marcus convinces the council to make him regent. Once that happens, you're not the emperor anymore. You're just an inconvenient reminder of the legitimate line. And inconvenient reminders have a way of disappearing." Cedric sat down heavily. He looked broken, lost. "What do I do?" "You show up. You walk into that council chamber and you remind everyone that you're still breathing, still crowned, still the only person with the legal authority to make decisions. And then you order Marcus arrested for treason before he can finish destroying everything your family spent 3 generations building. He has the entire Imperial Guard. He has men who are following orders because they're afraid not to. Most of them don't want a coup. They want stability. We give them that. We show them that the Emperor is still in control, still competent, still capable of leading. We make them choose between a general who's been in power for 1 day and an emperor who represents 300 years of legitimate succession. And if they choose Marcus, then we fight." Evelyn's eyes were hard. "But we fight as emperor and empress, not as 2 people who forgot they were supposed to be on the same side." Cedric looked at her, really looked at her, like he was seeing the woman he married instead of the ghost he'd tried to erase. "I'm sorry," he said, "for all of it, for Seraphine, for forgetting what you were. What you are. Sorry doesn't undo anything, but it's a start." Evelyn moved to the window, looking out at the capital as dawn started breaking over the eastern districts. "We need to move now, before Marcus realizes I'm here." "He already knows." The voice came from the doorway. Everyone turned. General Marcus stood framed in the entrance, flanked by 10 guards in full armor. His hand rested on his sword. His expression was calm, almost amused. "Your Majesty," he said to Evelyn, not Cedric, "I was wondering when you'd show up." The room went silent. Thorn's hand moved to his weapon, but Marcus's guards already had crossbows aimed. Moving meant dying. Nobody moved. "You knew," Evelyn said. "Of course I knew. Did you think I wouldn't have people watching the Eastern Wing? I've been tracking you since you entered the palace, watching where you went, who you spoke with, what little rebellion you thought you were organizing." Marcus smiled. "You're predictable, Your Majesty. You always have been. That's why you failed." "I haven't failed yet." "Haven't you?" He gestured at the room. "You're surrounded. Your emperor is powerless. Your allies are scattered. And in 2 hours, the council will vote me regent and this entire charade will be over. You'll be arrested. Cedric will be retired to some forgotten estate. And the Empire will finally have leadership that understands strength." "Leadership that understands theft, you mean?" "Theft?" Marcus laughed. "Is that what you call it when the incompetent are replaced by the competent?" When a weak emperor who can barely manage his own household is set aside for someone who actually knows how to wield power? You're staging a coup. I'm saving the empire from itself. Marcus's eyes went cold. Cedric has been a disaster. The provinces are bleeding. The treasury is empty because of investigations you started. Foreign kingdoms smell weakness. Someone needs to fix this. Someone who isn't burdened by sentiment or hesitation or a forgotten queen who thinks she matters. Evelyn stepped forward. One of the crossbows tracked her movement, but she ignored it. You're right about one thing. Cedric has been weak. But you're not strong, Marcus. You're just another ambitious man who thinks cruelty and power are the same thing. You think controlling the palace means controlling the empire. You think fear makes people loyal, but fear just makes people wait for a better option. And you're that option? Marcus shook his head. You're nothing. A discarded wife with no army, no support, no leverage. What are you going to do? Talk me to death? No. Evelyn's smile was sharp. I'm going to let you finish destroying yourself. She pulled a folded paper from inside her cloak and held it up. This is a signed confession from Lord Holt. Names, dates, amounts. Every corrupt deal, every stolen coin, every arrangement you made to position yourselves to take over. He sang like a bird once he realized how completely you'd betrayed him by moving without his approval. Marcus's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. And this, Evelyn continued, pulling another document, is testimony from 12 servants who witnessed your meetings with Holt, who heard you planning this coup, who watched you poison my food and threaten my guard and coordinate assassination attempts. Hearsay. Maybe, but it's a lot of hearsay from a lot of people, all telling the same story. She took another step forward, and this, she held up a third paper, is an order from the emperor himself, signed this morning, authorizing your arrest for treason. That's impossible. The emperor has been under guard by men who chose him over you when given the option. Evelyn glanced at Cedric. Tell him. Cedric stood. His voice was stronger now, less uncertain. You're under arrest, General Marcus, for treason against the crown, for theft of imperial resources, for attempting to overthrow the legitimate government. Surrender your weapon and submit to custody. Marcus stared at him. Then he laughed again. It was an ugly sound. You think a piece of paper changes anything? I have 300 men in this palace. You have what? 20? 30? I've already won. That vote is a formality. The council knows which way the power is flowing. Then why are you here? Evelyn asked quietly. If you've already won, why are you standing in this room trying to convince us of it? If you were secure, you'd be in the council chamber preparing your regency. Instead, you're here, talking, stalling, almost like you're worried something might go wrong. Marcus's smile disappeared. You're afraid, Evelyn continued. Not of me, not of Cedric, but of what happens when people realize you're not as strong as you pretend to be. That your whole coup depends on everyone believing it's inevitable. The moment they stop believing, the moment they see a legitimate alternative, your power evaporates. I could kill you right now. You could, but then you'd have to explain to the council why you murdered the Empress in the Emperor's chambers. You'd have to explain why the Emperor's signed arrest warrant for you is worthless. You'd have to explain why you're acting like a tyrant instead of a protector. She paused. Go ahead. Kill me. Prove everything I've been saying about you. Make yourself the villain in front of witnesses you can't silence. Marcus's hand tightened on his sword. The moment stretched, thin as broken ice. Then voices erupted from the corridor outside. Shouting. The sound of steel on steel. One of Marcus's guards burst through the door. General, the Western barracks are revolting. Half the guard is refusing orders. General Aldrich is leading an assault on the council hall. Marcus spun toward the door. His control cracking, his perfect coup falling apart in real time. And Evelyn smiled, because that's what she'd been stalling for. Time. For Aldrich's men to reach the uncertain guards. For word to spread that the Emperor was alive and issuing orders. For the palace to realize there was still a choice to make. You lose, she said. Marcus turned back to her, his face twisted with rage. Not yet! He drew his sword. Thorn moved faster. His blade came up, parrying the strike meant for Evelyn's throat. Steel rang against steel. Guards poured into the room. Chaos erupted. Evelyn grabbed Cedric and pulled him back as fighting exploded around them. Thorn drove Marcus back with brutal efficiency, each strike designed to kill. Two of Marcus's guards went down under crossbow fire from Aldrich's men who'd followed the sounds of conflict. The room became a cage of violence, too small, too crowded, blades finding flesh, men screaming. Marcus fought like a man with nothing left to lose. He drove Thorn back, opened a cut across his shoulder, kicked him off balance. Then he lunged at Evelyn. She didn't think, just moved. The knife from under her pillow, the one she'd carried since the first assassination attempt, came up and caught Marcus's sword arm. The blade sank deep between armor plates. Blood sprayed hot across her hands. Marcus screamed. His sword clattered to the floor. Thorn recovered and put his blade against Marcus's throat. "Yield," he said. Marcus looked at Evelyn. His face was pale. Blood poured from his arm. "You won't survive this. Even if you win today. The Empire will tear itself apart. Too many enemies, too much corruption. You can't fix it." "Maybe not." Evelyn's hands were shaking, covered in blood. "But I can burn out the rot and let something better grow in its place." She nodded to Thorn. "Take him to the cells. Make sure he lives long enough to stand trial." Guards dragged Marcus away. The room slowly emptied. Bodies were removed. Blood was cleaned. Evelyn stood in the center of it all, breathing hard, trying to process what had just happened. Cedric approached carefully. "Are you all right?" "No, but I'm alive." She looked at him. "We need to move. The council is gathering. If we don't get there before they vote..." "They won't vote." Cedric's voice was firm. "Not without the Emperor present. Not without hearing both sides. I may have been weak, Evelyn, but I'm still the crown. That has to mean something." "It means something if you make it mean something." He nodded. "Then let's go remind them what an emperor looks like." The walk to the council chamber felt like walking to an execution. Evelyn's execution or Marcus's, she wasn't sure yet. Dawn had fully broken. Light poured through the palace windows, illuminating halls that had seemed oppressive in darkness. Servants watched from doorways as they passed. Some bowed. Others just stared. Word had spread. The emperor and empress walking together. General Marcus arrested. The coup collapsing. The empire holding its breath. They reached the council chamber doors. 40 nobles waited inside. Men who controlled provinces, armies, trade routes. Men who could make or break emperors if they unified. 2 guards stood at the entrance. They moved to stop Evelyn and Cedric, then saw the blood still on Evelyn's hands and stepped aside. The doors opened. Every head turned. Evelyn walked in first. Not behind Cedric, not beside him. First. Because she'd earned it. The council chamber fell silent. 40 nobles staring at a woman they thought was finished. A ghost made flesh. Lord Corwin Holt sat in chains at the back, flanked by guards. His face twisted with hate when he saw Evelyn alive. She smiled at him, cold, victorious. Then she addressed the council. "Gentlemen, I understand you are about to vote on a regency. Before you do, I thought you might want to hear from your emperor, the one who's still breathing, still crowned, still the only person in this room with the legal authority to make decisions about who runs this empire." She stepped aside. Cedric walked forward. He looked every inch the emperor now, back straight, eyes hard, a man who'd remembered what power looked like. "General Marcus has been arrested for treason," he said. His voice carried through the chamber. "Lord Holt is in custody for corruption and conspiracy. Both will stand trial. Both will face justice. And any member of this council who supported their coup will answer for their choices." Silence. Absolute and terrified. "But," Cedric continued, "I'm not interested in purges. I'm interested in rebuilding. The empire has been bleeding for years. Corruption, theft, betrayal. It ends now. Anyone who wants to be part of the solution can stay. Anyone who wants to continue profiting from problems can leave. Choose." He waited. Nobody moved. Then Lord Castellan, an older noble who controlled the eastern provinces, stood slowly. "Your Majesty, if I may." "Speak. Many of us have been uncertain about the empire's direction. We saw weakness. We saw corruption. Some of us made compromises we're not proud of because we thought there was no alternative." He paused. "But if you're offering a new direction, if the Empress is going to be part of that direction, Then I believe most of us would prefer stability under legitimate rule over chaos under pretenders. Other nobles nodded, murmured agreement. Cedric looked at Eveline. What do you think? The question surprised her. He was actually asking, acknowledging her authority in front of everyone who'd tried to erase her. I think Lord Castellan is right, she said. The Empire needs stability. It needs leadership that understands both strength and mercy. It needs an emperor who can lead and an empress who can govern. We tried it separately. We failed. Maybe it's time we tried it together. Cedric extended his hand. Eveline took it. And in that moment, in front of 40 nobles who'd thought she was finished, she stepped back into power. Not as a forgotten queen, as something new. Holt. The trial of General Marcus and Lord Holt took 3 weeks. Public, transparent. Every piece of evidence laid bare for the entire empire to see. The treasury theft, the assassination attempts, the coup planning, everything. Both men were found guilty. Holt was stripped of his titles and exiled. His lands redistributed to provinces that had been neglected for years. Marcus was executed, not by Eveline's order, by the emperor's, by law, by justice that finally meant something. Seraphine Holt disappeared, fled the capital before the trial concluded. Rumor said she'd gone to the Eastern Kingdoms. Rumor said a lot of things. Eveline didn't care enough to confirm them. The girl had been a symptom, not the disease. The council was restructured. Half the nobles were removed. Some resigned. Some were forced out. Their positions filled by competent administrators from the provinces. People who actually understood governance instead of just politics. The treasury investigations continued. Every corrupt deal unwound. Every stolen coin accounted for. It would take years to fix completely. But the bleeding had stopped. And through it all, Eveline stood beside Cedric. Not behind him, not ahead of him. Beside him. They worked together the way they should have from the beginning. His authority, her competence. His title, her intelligence. Two halves of something that only worked when unified. The eastern wing was demolished. Eveline moved back to chambers adjacent to the emperor's. Not the same rooms. She'd earned her own space, but close enough to matter. The palace stopped feeling like a cage. The empire stopped bleeding. And Eveline stopped being the forgotten queen. 6 months after the coup, Eveline stood in what used to be the throne room. It had been renovated, less gold, more function, a room designed for governing instead of impressing. Thorn found her there, staring at the throne that had once excluded her. Your Majesty, the delegation from the northern provinces is here. Send them in. There's something else. Thorn hesitated. Aldrich wants to speak with you, privately. About what? He didn't say, but he looked concerned. Eveline frowned. Aldrich didn't concern easily. Tell the delegation I'll be delayed. Take me to Aldrich. They found him in the war room studying maps with an intensity that made Eveline's instincts scream warning. General, what's wrong? Aldrich looked up. His expression was grim. We have a problem. The Eastern Kingdoms have been moving troops toward the border. Not an invasion, not yet, but they're positioning, testing our response. Why? Because they heard about the coup. They heard about the instability. They think we're weak. He paused. And they're not entirely wrong. We stopped the bleeding internally, but externally, the empire looks vulnerable, divided, like easy prey. Eveline felt something cold settle in her chest. How long do we have? Before they move? Maybe 6 months. Maybe less if they think we're not prepared. Are we prepared? No. Aldrich's voice was flat. Our military is still recovering from Marcus's purge. Half the generals we exiled for competence are still in exile. The ones who stayed are either incompetent or uncertain. We need to rebuild, fast. And we need to show strength before the Eastern Kingdoms decide weak empires are worth conquering. Eveline turned to the map, traced the border with her finger, saw the territories that would fall first if war came, provinces full of people who'd just started believing the empire could protect them again. What do you need? She asked. Everything. Soldiers, supplies, competent commanders. And most importantly, I need the Empress to stop being diplomatic and start being terrifying. Because right now, the Eastern Kingdoms think you're just Cedric's smart wife. They need to understand you're the reason this empire survived when it should have fallen. Eveline looked at him. You want me to go to war? I want you to prevent one. But if prevention fails, yes. You're the only person in this palace who has the strategic mind and the ruthlessness to win what's coming. She thought about the girl in Thorn Hollow, the wooden bird in her pocket, the empire she'd bled to save. She thought about everything she'd sacrificed to get here. And she realized something that should have terrified her but instead felt inevitable. This wasn't the end. It was barely the beginning. Start recalling the exiled generals, she said. Every competent commander we pushed out because they threatened Cedric's ego. Bring them back. Give them positions. Make them understand the old empire is dead and the new one rewards merit. And the Eastern Kingdoms? Send them a message. Tell them the empress of this empire wants to meet with their leadership. Diplomatic summit. Neutral ground. Peace talks. Aldrich frowned. You think they'll accept? They'll accept because they're curious. They want to see if I'm as dangerous as the rumors say. She smiled. It wasn't kind. And when they meet me, when they realize the woman who destroyed a coup from inside a palace can do much worse to them from outside, they'll decide maybe this empire isn't as weak as they thought. And if they don't, then we show them what a rebuilt empire looks like when it stops being merciful. Aldrich studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. The Iron Queen. That's what they're calling you in the provinces. I've been called worse. They mean it as respect. I know. Evelyn turned from the map. But respect is just fear that learned manners, and I'm fine with both. She left the war room with Thorn at her side, walking toward whatever came next. The Empire had survived, but survival was just the beginning. Now came the part where she made sure it never had to merely survive again. That night, Evelyn stood on the balcony of her chambers, looking out over the capital. Lights flickered in windows. People lived their lives, unaware of how close they'd come to losing everything. Cedric found her there. You're thinking about the Eastern Kingdoms, he said. Always. We'll handle it. I know. She didn't look at him. But handling it means becoming something I never wanted to be. What? A war empress. A woman who sends people to die for borders and pride and the illusion of security. She paused. I wanted to build. I wanted to fix what was broken. Instead, I'm preparing to break what others have built. That's not fair to yourself. You didn't choose this. The Eastern Kingdoms did. Doesn't matter who chose it. I'm still the one who has to finish it. Cedric was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that surprised her. I'm sorry. For what? For making you carry this alone. For forgetting that empires need two people to rule them properly. For thinking I could be emperor without actually being a partner. He moved to stand beside her. You saved us. But you shouldn't have had to. No, I shouldn't have. She finally looked at him. But I did. And now we're here. And the question isn't who's to blame, it's what happens next. What do you want to happen next? Evelyn thought about that. About the woman she'd been. About the woman she'd become. About the woman she was still becoming. I want the empire to be something worth saving, not just for us, but for everyone who died believing it mattered, for every servant who stayed loyal when they should have run, for every soldier who chose honor over survival. She paused. And I want the people who threatened that to be afraid. Very afraid. Cedric nodded slowly. Then we make them afraid together. He extended his hand. Evelyn took it. And somewhere in the Eastern Kingdoms, in war rooms and council chambers, military commanders were about to learn something that would haunt them for years. The forgotten queen they'd dismissed as a court footnote had become the most dangerous woman in the empire, and she was done being forgotten. Bang. 3 days later, a messenger arrived from the Eastern Kingdoms. They accepted the summit. The Iron Queen would meet with their leadership in neutral territory. Peace talks. Or a prelude to war. Evelyn read the acceptance letter and felt something settle in her chest. Not peace. Not victory. Purpose. She'd survived betrayal, survived assassination, survived erasure. Now she would survive whatever came next. Because queens who transformed abandonment into power didn't stop at survival. They built empires that learned to fear the women they'd tried to forget. And Evelyn Marrow, once forgotten, now remembered, was about to teach the Eastern Kingdoms exactly what that meant. The war room awaited. The generals were gathering, the empire was preparing, and the woman who'd once been invisible was about to become the most visible threat any kingdom had ever faced. This was the point of no return, the moment where the forgotten queen became the Iron Empress, where the woman they'd buried rose up not just to reclaim her throne, but to forge an empire strong enough that no one would ever dare try to erase her again. The summit was scheduled for the border fortress of Greymarch, a crumbling monument to wars that predated the current empire by 2 centuries. Neutral ground meant neither side could claim advantage from territory, which really meant both sides were equally vulnerable to betrayal. Evelyn understood that perfectly. She rode out with an escort of 50 soldiers, all handpicked by Aldrich. Thorn commanded her personal guard. Cedric remained in the capital, officially to manage the empire in her absence, realistically because sending both Emperor and Empress into potentially hostile territory was suicide dressed as strategy. The journey took 4 days through territories that still carried scars from the coup. Villages rebuilding, roads being repaired, people watching the imperial banners pass with expressions that mixed hope and suspicion in equal measure. They trusted her now, but trust was fragile. It shattered under pressure and took decades to rebuild. Evelyn felt the weight of that trust like a blade pressed against her throat every mile they traveled. Thorn rode beside her on the 3rd day, his expression thoughtful in that dangerous way that meant he'd been thinking too much. "Something's wrong," he said finally. "Elaborate." The Eastern Kingdoms accepted too quickly. No negotiation about location, no demands for terms, just immediate acceptance. He paused. That's not how kingdoms behave when they're testing weakness. That's how they behave when they've already decided what they want. Maybe they want peace. Maybe. Thorn didn't sound convinced. Or maybe they want you specifically, in a place where 50 soldiers won't be enough if things go wrong. You think it's a trap. I think powerful women make enemies, and enemies wait for opportunities. This summit is an opportunity. Evelyn had considered that, spent sleepless nights weighing probabilities. The Eastern Kingdoms had resources, but not unity. 3 separate states loosely bound by trade agreements and mutual suspicion. Getting them to coordinate an ambush would require someone inside their leadership with enough influence to override territorial rivalries. Someone who understood the empire's internal structure well enough to know exactly when and where Evelyn would be vulnerable. The thought had been gnawing at her since they left the capital. A suspicion without evidence. A feeling in her gut that something fundamental was wrong with this entire situation. But she'd come anyway, because refusing would signal weakness, and weakness invited the very war she was trying to prevent. So she rode toward potential disaster with 50 soldiers and a captain who saw threats in shadows and a mind that wouldn't stop calculating odds that didn't favor survival. They reached Greymarch at dusk on the 4th day. The fortress sat on a plateau overlooking the border river, its walls blackened by fires that had burned out generations ago. The Eastern Kingdom's delegation had already arrived. Their banners flew from the northern tower, 3 different crests, 3 kingdoms pretending to be unified. Evelyn studied the fortress through Thorn's spyglass, counted guards, assessed defensive positions, looked for anything that screamed ambush. Everything looked professional, appropriate, exactly what a diplomatic summit should look like, which meant nothing. The best traps looked like safety until the moment they closed. "We proceed as planned," she said, "but keep half the men outside the fortress. If this goes wrong, I want someone alive to warn the capital." "Your Majesty." "That's not a debate, Marcus. If I don't walk out of there, someone needs to tell Cedric what happened. Make sure that someone is you." Thorn's jaw tightened, but he nodded. They rode through the fortress gates as the last light died in the western sky. The courtyard was vast and empty, designed to hold armies but currently holding only shadows and the cold promise of autumn pressing down from mountains to the north. 3 delegations waited inside the Great Hall. Evelyn recognized their leaders from intelligence reports. King Davros of Thorngate, a warrior king who'd taken his throne by killing his brother. Queen Mira of Coldmere, young and ruthless and known for political marriages that always ended with her gaining territory. Prince Liston of Ashvale, 3rd son of a dead king who'd murdered his way to power through tactics that made Marcus's coup look civilized. Dangerous people. All of them. Evelyn walked into that hall like she owned it. Because hesitation was blood in the water, And these were sharks who'd traveled a long way, hoping to smell weakness. She would not give them that satisfaction. King Davros stood as she approached. He was tall and scarred and looked like violence wrapped in formal clothes. His bow was shallow, barely respectful. "Empress Evelyn, we've heard much about you." "I hope it was entertaining. Informative." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "The Empire has been unstable. We wanted to ensure our borders remain secure." "Your borders are secure as long as you don't give us reason to cross them." "Direct." "I appreciate that." Davros gestured to the table where maps had been spread. "Shall we discuss terms?" "That's why I'm here." They sat. 5 rulers around a table marked with borders and territories, and the fragile lines that separated peace from war. Queen Mira studied Evelyn with calculating eyes. Prince Liston looked bored, which probably meant he was the most dangerous person in the room, aside from Evelyn herself. The negotiations started simply. Trade agreements, border patrols, mutual defense pacts against common threats, standard diplomatic language that meant everything and nothing depending on who enforced it. But underneath the formality, Evelyn felt something wrong, a current in the room that didn't match the words being spoken. Davros was too agreeable, Mira too quiet, Liston too attentive despite his affected disinterest. They were waiting for something. 2 hours into the summit, Evelyn understood what. A messenger burst into the hall. Not one of hers, one of Davros's men, his face pale and urgent. "Your Majesty, news from the Empire's capital." Everyone turned. The messenger handed Davros a sealed letter. The king read it slowly, his expression shifting from neutral to something that looked like satisfaction wrapped in false concern. He looked at Evelyn. "It seems there's been an incident at your capital." Evelyn's blood turned cold. "What kind of incident?" "Emperor Cedric has been arrested, charged with conspiracy to commit treason." Davros slid the letter across the table. "By General Aldrich." The words hit like a physical blow. Evelyn grabbed the letter. Read it twice. The seal was authentic, imperial. The signature was Aldrich's. It detailed charges against Cedric, collaboration with Lord Holt, advanced knowledge of the coup, complicity in the treasury theft, everything framed to make Cedric look like he'd been working with his enemies all along, using Evelyn as cover while profiting from corruption. And at the bottom, a declaration. General Aldrich had assumed emergency powers. The council had voted to support him. A regency had been established pending investigation of the emperor's crimes. The empire had just executed another coup, while Evelyn was 4 days away, unable to stop it, unable to even verify if any of this was real or fabricated. She looked up at Davros, at Mira, at Liston. They were all watching her with expressions that confirmed her worst fear. They knew. They'd known before the summit even started. This wasn't a peace negotiation. It was a distraction. Get the dangerous empress away from the capital. Keep her occupied with diplomatic theater. Give Aldrich time to move without her interference. And she'd walked right into it. "You knew," she said quietly. Davros didn't bother denying it. "We had word that certain elements in your empire were dissatisfied with the current leadership. We thought it prudent to keep you engaged elsewhere while internal matters resolved themselves." "Internal matters?" Evelyn's voice was flat. "You're talking about treason. We're talking about stability. Your empire has been chaos for months. Coups, arrests, trials. The Eastern kingdoms need reliable neighbors, not powder kegs waiting to explode. General Aldrich approached us with assurances that he could provide that stability." "Aldrich contacted you weeks ago, before the summit was even proposed." Davros leaned back. "He's a practical man, understands that empires need strong leadership, not divided authority between a weak emperor and his clever wife." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Aldrich hadn't been preparing for war with the Eastern kingdoms. He'd been preparing to take over the empire with their backing. The military buildups, the recalled generals, the strategic positioning, all of it had been framed as defense. But it was actually preparation for another coup. And she'd helped him do it. She'd given him the authority, the resources, the trust. Because she'd thought he was loyal. But loyalty was just another word for waiting for a better opportunity. And Aldrich had been waiting since the day Cedric exiled him for being too competent. He'd used her. Let her destroy Marcus and Holt. Let her rebuild the military with capable commanders who were loyal to him, not the throne. Let her clear away every obstacle between him and absolute power. Then he'd sent her to the border while he took everything she'd bled to save. Evelyn stood slowly. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, from rage so cold it felt like drowning. You made a mistake, Davros raised an eyebrow. Did we? Aldrich isn't stable. He's ambitious. And ambitious men don't stop at one empire. He'll consolidate power, rebuild the military, and then he'll look at your kingdoms and see opportunities instead of allies. You're not making a deal with a practical leader. You're arming a threat that will turn on you the moment he doesn't need you anymore. That's a risk we're willing to take. It's a risk that will kill you. Perhaps, Davros gestured to his guards. But that's a concern for another day. Right now, Empress Evelyn, you're in a delicate position. Your emperor is imprisoned. Your general has seized power, and you're in a fortress controlled by kingdoms that have already chosen sides. Understanding crystallized. They weren't letting her leave. You're holding me hostage. We're ensuring you don't interfere with the transition. Aldrich assured us you'd react emotionally to his takeover, possibly start a civil war. We can't allow that. The region needs stability, not more chaos caused by a woman who can't accept when she's lost. Evelyn looked at the guards positioned around the hall, at Thorn standing behind her, hand on his sword, at the three rulers who thought they'd outmaneuvered her. She had maybe 10 seconds before this turned into violence she couldn't win. How much did he pay you? She asked. Excuse me? Aldrich, how much did he offer for your cooperation, territory, trade concessions, or just the promise that he'd be too busy rebuilding to bother with your borders? Davros' expression hardened. This conversation is over. You'll be escorted to chambers where you'll remain as our guest until the Empire's transition is complete. Your soldiers will be disarmed and confined. Any resistance will be met with appropriate force. Appropriate force. Evelyn smiled. It was not a sane expression. You're threatening to kill an empress on neutral ground during a diplomatic summit. You understand that's an act of war? Against whom? The Empire is in transition. There's no legitimate authority to declare war. And by the time there is, you'll either be irrelevant or dead. Davros stood. Take her. Guards moved forward. Thorn's sword came out. Don't, Evelyn said. He froze. Put the sword down, Marcus. We're outnumbered 30-1. Fighting gets us killed. Compliance gets us time. Time for what? Time for me to think. Thorn looked at her for a long moment. Then he lowered his blade. The guards took their weapons, took Evelyn's knife, searched them both for hidden blades with professional efficiency. Then they were escorted from the great hall, through corridors that smelled like old violence and new betrayal, to chambers in the eastern tower where the windows were barred and the door was locked from the outside. Thorn paced the room like a caged animal. We're dead. You know that. Once Aldrich consolidates power, he's not going to let you live. You're too dangerous, too competent. Every day you breathe is a reminder that he's a usurper. I know. Then why did we surrender? Because fighting would have killed us in 30 seconds. This way we have hours. Maybe a full day if they're cautious about executing an empress without proper justification. And what do we do with those hours? Evelyn walked to the window, looked out at the courtyard below where her soldiers were being disarmed and confined to the stables. 50 men who'd followed her into this trap because they trusted her judgment. She'd led them here to die. The thought sat in her chest like a stone, heavy, inescapable. She'd survived assassination attempts, survived betrayal from her husband, survived a coup and a trial, and 6 months of rebuilding an empire from rubble. But she hadn't survived this, because this wasn't about survival anymore. This was about accepting that every decision she'd made, every person she'd trusted, every strategy she'd employed had been exactly what Aldrich needed her to do. He'd played her perfectly, used her competence against her, used her desire to rebuild against her, used her trust in generals who'd been exiled for loyalty against her. She'd thought she was forging an empire strong enough to survive. Instead, she'd built the weapon that would destroy her. The irony was devastating. Your Majesty. Thorn's voice was quiet. What do we do? Evelyn turned from the window, looked at the man who'd stood beside her through everything, who'd protected her when protection meant dying, who'd followed her into this because he believed she was worth following. I don't know, she said. The admission felt like defeat, like acknowledging that for the first time since the Eastern Wing, since the first assassination attempt, since the moment she'd decided being forgotten meant being dead, she had no plan, no strategy, no path forward that didn't end with her execution or imprisonment or exile to some forgotten corner where she'd spend the rest of her life remembering how close she'd come to mattering. Thorne sat down heavily. Then we're finished. Maybe finished isn't the worst thing. Evelyn's voice was distant. Maybe I've been fighting so hard to survive that I forgot to ask if survival was worth the cost. You saved the Empire. I saved it for Aldrich. I cleared away everyone who could stop him. I rebuilt the military he's using to take over. I gave him everything he needed to succeed. She laughed. It was a broken sound. I thought I was being clever, thought I was outmaneuvering my enemies, but I was just doing exactly what the real enemy wanted all along. That's not fair. It's true. And truth doesn't care about fairness. She moved away from the window, sat on the floor with her back against the stone wall. Do you know what the worst part is? What? I would do it again, even knowing how it ends, because the alternative was dying quietly in the Eastern Wing while the Empire ate itself. At least this way I fought. At least I mattered for a while before everything fell apart. Thorne didn't respond, couldn't respond, because they both knew she was right. Sometimes fighting just meant choosing how you wanted to die instead of accepting how others wanted to kill you. And Evelyn had chosen to die mattering, even if mattering turned out to be a trap. Hours passed. No food, no water. No word from the Eastern Kingdoms about what came next. Just silence and stone walls and the slow realization that powerful women who threaten men's ambitions don't get trials. They get disappeared. Night fell. The fortress grew quiet. Evelyn sat in darkness thinking about every decision that had led here. Every choice, every calculation, every moment where she'd thought she was winning when she was actually losing. The door opened near midnight. A guard entered. Behind him, Prince Liston stepped into the chamber, alone and unarmed. His expression was unreadable in the lamplight he carried. Out, he told the guard. The man hesitated. I said out. I'll call if I need you. The guard left. The door closed. Liston set the lamp on the floor and studied Evelyn with eyes that saw too much. You're wondering why I'm here, he said. The thought crossed my mind. I'm here because you're more useful alive than dead, and I'm the only person in this fortress who understands that. Explain. Liston sat across from her, casual, relaxed, like they were having tea instead of discussing her execution. Davros is a warrior who thinks swords solve problems. Mira is a politician who thinks manipulation solves problems. Neither understands that the real problem isn't you, it's Aldrich. I tried telling them that. They didn't listen because they think they control the situation, but they don't. Aldrich does. He's been feeding them information for weeks, shaping their perception, making them think he's the stable option and you're the chaos. Liston paused. But I've been watching you since you walked into that hall. You're not chaos. You're consequence, and Aldrich is terrified of you. He has a strange way of showing it. Does he? He couldn't kill you in the capital. You have too much support. Too many people who remember that you saved them. So he had to remove you another way. Get you out of the Empire. Keep you isolated while he consolidates. Then eventually arrange an accident that makes you disappear without creating a martyr. And you're telling me this because I'm not interested in whatever empire Aldrich builds. I'm interested in preventing a war that will consume all of us. And that means keeping you alive long enough to stop him. Evelyn studied him, looking for the lie, the trap, the hidden agenda that every powerful person carried like a knife behind their back. Why would you help me? Because Aldrich approached me first, before Davros, before Mira. He wanted my kingdom's support for his coup, offered me territory, trade rights, everything I could want. Liston's smile was cold. But I've seen ambitious generals before. I know what happens when they get what they want. They don't stop. They can't stop. They keep taking until someone stops them permanently. So you're betting on me to be that someone. I'm betting that a woman who survived being erased has better survival instincts than a general who thinks military might equals political stability. Your bet might be wrong. It might be, Liston stood, but it's the bet I'm making. Tomorrow morning, Davros will propose moving you to more secure accommodations, somewhere far from the border where you can't cause problems. During the transfer, there will be an opportunity, a moment where the guard is lax, where the route passes through terrain that favors small numbers over large forces. You're helping me escape. I'm creating a possibility. What you do with it is your choice. He moved to the door, then paused. But understand something, Empress. If you run, if you disappear into exile somewhere safe, Aldrich wins. The Empire falls apart. And in 5 years, my kingdom will be at war with whatever emerges from that collapse. So don't run. Run toward. Back to your capital. Back to the fight. Because you're the only person dangerous enough to match him. What if I'm not? What if he's already won? Then we're all dead. But we'll be dead knowing someone tried. He knocked on the door. Good luck, Your Majesty. I suspect you'll need it. The guard returned. Liston left. The door locked again. Thorne stared at Evelyn. Did that just happen? I think so. Do we trust him? No, but we don't have better options. Evelyn stood, her mind already working through possibilities. Tomorrow, during the transfer, we have one chance to get this right. And if it's a trap, then at least we die trying instead of waiting. She looked at him. I'm done waiting, Marcus. I'm done being reactive. I'm done letting other people dictate when and how I fall. If I'm going to die, it's going to be on my terms. Fighting, clawing, making every enemy regret they didn't kill me when they had easier chances. Thorne smiled. It was grim, but genuine. There's the woman who terrified a palace. That woman never left. She just got tired of being patient. Evelyn moved to the window, looked out at stars that didn't care about empires or betrayal or women who'd forgotten how to surrender. Tomorrow would bring violence or escape or death. Tonight brought clarity. She'd spent months being strategic, calculated, playing the Game of Thrones like it had rules that mattered. But the game didn't have rules. It just had survivors and corpses. And Evelyn was done pretending she could survive by being clever. From now on, she would survive by being relentless. Morning came with guards and chains and a journey that started with degradation and would end with freedom or death. They were marched from the tower to the courtyard where horses waited. Davros stood watching, satisfaction written across his face. He thought this was over, thought he'd solved a problem by removing it. Evelyn let him think that, let them all think she was defeated, broken, accepting her fate, because defeated women didn't get watched as carefully as dangerous ones. The chains were real, heavy iron meant to prevent escape, but they weren't locked properly. Whoever secured them had been careless or bribed or both. Another gift from Liston, probably. Another small possibility in a situation designed to have none. They rode east, away from the border, toward territories controlled by Queen Mira. 20 guards. Enough to prevent escape. Not enough to prevent chaos if everything went wrong simultaneously. The route took them through a narrow valley 3 hours from Greymarch. Rocky terrain, dense forest on both sides. The kind of place where an ambush could come from anywhere, or where an escape could disappear into anywhere. Thorne rode beside her. His chains weren't secured either. His eyes kept scanning the forest, looking for the moment, the opportunity. The split second where everything would either work or fail catastrophically. They reached the narrowest part of the valley near midday. That's when the attack came. Not from Liston's forces. Not from anyone Evelyn expected. From her own soldiers. The 50 men who'd been confined at Greymarch, who'd supposedly been disarmed and contained. They hit the convoy from both sides. Arrows first, killing half the guards before anyone understood what was happening. Then blades. Close fighting in tight terrain where numbers mattered less than desperation. Chaos erupted. Thorne broke his chains like they were made of paper, grabbed a fallen guard's sword, started cutting through anyone between him and Evelyn. She didn't wait to be rescued. She broke her own chains, grabbed a blade from a dying guard, and fought her way toward the nearest horse. Blood sprayed. Men screamed. The valley became a killing ground. Evelyn reached a horse, mounted, turned to find Thorne. He was surrounded. 4 guards. Too many. His sword moved like lightning, but they were wearing him down. She rode back into the fighting. Her blade took one guard across the throat. another through the ribs. The third died before he realized she was behind him. Thorn finished the fourth. "Go," he shouted. "Get out of here." "Not without you." "I'll follow. You're the target. Move." Evelyn hesitated for one heartbeat. Then she rode. Because he was right. The guards were targeting her specifically. Every blade, every arrow. She was the prize, the threat, the woman who needed to die. Staying meant getting him killed trying to protect her. So she rode hard toward the forest, toward cover, toward escape. Arrows followed. One grazed her shoulder. Pain exploded, but she kept riding. The forest swallowed her. Branches whipped past. The horse stumbled on roots but recovered. Behind her, the sounds of fighting faded. Distance or death, she couldn't tell. She rode for 3 hours. No pursuit, no sounds of anyone following, just silence and trees and the crushing realization that she'd left Thorn behind to die so she could survive. Another sacrifice on the altar of her ambition. Another person who'd bled because she couldn't let go. She finally stopped in a clearing near a stream. Dismounted. The horse drank. Her shoulder bled through her clothes. She was alone. Miles from the capital, hunted by the Eastern Kingdoms and betrayed by her own general. Everything she'd built was gone. Everyone who'd trusted her was either dead or imprisoned. The empire she'd bled to save had forgotten her again, this time permanently. Evelyn knelt by the stream, washed blood from her hands, looked at her reflection in water that didn't care about empires or queens or women who'd tried to matter. She looked like death, felt like defeat. But underneath that, underneath the exhaustion and pain and grief, something else stirred. Something cold and sharp and absolutely merciless. Aldrich thought he'd won by getting her away from the capital. The Eastern Kingdoms thought they'd solved a problem by imprisoning her. Everyone thought the Forgotten Queen had finally stayed forgotten. They were wrong. Because Evelyn Marrow had learned something essential during her time being erased. Something that had sustained her through assassination attempts and coups and betrayals that would have broken anyone else. She'd learned that queens who get buried don't stay buried unless you completely destroy them. And nobody had destroyed her. They just made her angrier. She stood, mounted the horse, turned toward the capital, 4 days away. Maybe less if she pushed hard. Through territories that might kill her. Past checkpoints controlled by people loyal to Aldrich. Into a city that thought she was dead or exiled or irrelevant. Into a palace that had erased her twice and thought twice would be enough. But Evelyn wasn't going back to reclaim what she'd lost. She was going back to burn down everything that had been built on her corpse. And when she was done, when the ashes settled and the Empire looked at what remained, they would understand something fundamental about power. You don't erase a woman by forgetting her. You erase her by making sure she never comes back. And they'd forgotten to make sure. The ride toward the capital began, not as an empress returning home, but as a weapon pointed at everything that had betrayed her. Aldrich wanted an empire. He was about to learn that empires built on betrayal burned faster than they rose. And the woman he'd tried to remove would be the one holding the torch. The horse died on the 3rd day. Collapsed mid-stride from exhaustion and Evelyn's refusal to stop pushing when every instinct screamed to rest. The animal had given everything it had, and everything wasn't enough. Evelyn understood that completely. She continued on foot. Through forests that hid bandits and territories controlled by nobles who'd probably already chosen Aldrich's side. Her shoulder throbbed where the arrow had grazed. Infection was setting in. She could feel it spreading like poison through her arm. Fever came in waves that made the world tilt and blur. She walked anyway. Because stopping meant dying, and dying meant Aldrich won, and she would crawl through hell on broken glass before giving him that satisfaction. 2 days from the capital, she reached a village called Millbrook. Small, forgotten. The kind of place empires ignored unless they needed soldiers or taxes. She stumbled into the town square near dusk, barely conscious, and collapsed against a well. People stared. A woman in torn clothes covered in blood and dirt. They probably thought she was a refugee from border raids, or a criminal, or something dangerous that should be reported to whatever authority still functioned out here. A girl approached, maybe 12. Thin and wary, but carrying water in a wooden cup. She held it out to Evelyn. "You look like you need this more than me." Evelyn took the cup with shaking hands, drank. The water tasted like life. "Thank you." "You running from something?" "Toward something." The girl studied her with eyes that had seen too much hardship to be fooled by simple answers. That's what people say when they're running from something they can't admit. Smart kid. What's your name? Eveline asked. Kara. I'm Eveline. Recognition flickered across Kara's face. Shock. Disbelief. Then something like hope. The Queen. You're the Queen. Not anymore. My ma says you are. Says you're the only one who ever cared about people like us. Says the new general is going to make everything worse. Kara glanced around nervously. You shouldn't be here. They're looking for you. Soldiers came through yesterday asking if anyone saw a woman traveling alone. Said there's a reward. Did anyone tell them anything? No. But that's because nobody's seen you yet. If they see you now, someone will talk. People are desperate. Rewards mean food. Eveline leaned back against the well. Her vision swam. The infection was getting worse. She had maybe a day before it took her completely. Not enough time to reach the capital. Not enough time to do anything except die in a forgotten village while Aldrich rebuilt the empire in his image. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it just made her angry. She'd survived too much to die from an infected arrow wound in a place nobody would remember. Is there a healer in this village? She asked. Old Marcus, he fixes horses mostly, but he knows wounds. Take me to him. Kara hesitated. If I do that, people will know I helped you. If the soldiers come back, they won't hurt you, I promise. How can you promise that? Because I'm going to make sure they're too busy dealing with me to care about anyone else. Kara studied her for a long moment. Then she nodded and helped Eveline to her feet. Old Marcus lived on the edge of the village in a house that smelled like horse medicine and herbs that probably had names Eveline didn't want to know. He was ancient and weathered and took one look at her shoulder before swearing in a language that predated the empire. That's infected deep. Should have treated it days ago. I was busy. Busy dying, looks like. He sat her down and started cleaning the wound with something that burned like liquid fire. This is going to hurt. Everything hurts. Fair enough. He worked in silence, cutting away dead flesh, packing the wound with herbs, wrapping it tight with clean cloth. Eveline bit down on leather to keep from screaming. Pain had become constant background noise. This was just louder. When he finished, Marcus sat back and studied her with eyes that had seen empires rise and fall and didn't seem impressed by either. You're that queen everyone's talking about. Word travels fast. Word about dead queens travels faster, especially when they're not actually dead. He paused. Soldiers came through, said you were a traitor, said you tried to destroy the empire, said anyone helping you would hang. And yet you're helping me. I'm helping a woman with an infected wound. What she does after that isn't my concern. He handed her a pouch of dried herbs. Mix this with water twice a day. Keeps infection from spreading. Won't heal you completely, but it'll buy time. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just don't die in my village. We've got enough problems without imperial attention. Eveline spent the night in Marcus's house. Fever dreams mixed with waking nightmares about Thorn dying in that valley. About Cedric rotting in a cell. About the empire burning while she lay helpless in a forgotten village. But morning came, and with it clarity born from desperation. She couldn't reach the capital on foot. Not in her condition, not with Aldrich's soldiers searching for her. But she didn't need to reach the capital. She needed to reach the people who'd been forgotten by the capital. The villages and towns that survived on scraps while nobles fought over power. The soldiers who'd been conscripted and discarded. The servants who'd been invisible their entire lives. The people Aldrich would ignore because powerful men always ignored those they considered beneath them. Those people were her army now. Not because they loved her, but because they hated what the empire had become under men who saw citizens as resources to be extracted instead of people to be protected. She found Kara in the morning. I need you to do something for me. What? Spread word. Tell everyone in this village and every village within a day's walk. Queen Eveline is alive. She's coming back. And she needs people willing to fight for an empire that actually remembers they exist. Fight with what? We don't have weapons. We don't have training. You have anger. You have desperation. You have nothing left to lose. Eveline's eyes were hard. That's more dangerous than any army. Aldrich thinks empires are controlled by soldiers and generals, but empires are just people. And when people decide they're done being stepped on, no amount of military force can stop them. Kara stared at her. You're going to start a rebellion. I'm going to finish one. Aldrich started it when he decided ambitious generals matter more than the people they're supposed to protect. I'm just going to make sure everyone understands what he's actually offering. Tyranny dressed as stability, oppression wrapped in order. And if we lose, then we lose fighting for something that matters instead of living under something that doesn't. Kara thought about that. Then she nodded and ran. By midday, word had spread through Millbrook. By evening, people gathered in the square. Farmers, blacksmiths, merchants. The forgotten foundation that held empires up while nobles fought over who got to stand on top. Eveline stood on the well platform. Weak, feverish, barely able to stand without swaying. But standing anyway. Because leaders didn't need to be strong. They needed to be unwilling to fall. Most of you don't know me, she said, her voice carried across the square. You've heard stories, maybe, about the queen who survived a coup, who rebuilt an empire from inside its ruins, who got betrayed and discarded and erased again. Silence. Everyone listening. Those stories are true. But here's what they don't tell you. I didn't survive because I was special. I survived because I refused to accept that being forgotten meant being finished. I survived because I understood something fundamental about power. It only exists when people believe in it. The moment they stop believing, it evaporates. She paused, letting that sink in. Sink. General Aldrich thinks he controls the empire because he controls the military. But militaries are just people following orders. And orders only matter if the people following them believe those orders serve something worth serving. Right now, Aldrich's orders serve him, his ambition, his vision of an empire where the strong devour the weak and call it stability. What do your orders serve? Someone called out. Nothing. Because I'm not giving orders. I'm asking. Will you fight? Will you stand up? Will you risk everything to prove that empires belong to the people who bleed for them, not the generals who bleed them? We'll die, a man said flatly. We're farmers and tradesmen against trained soldiers. Yes, some of you will die. Maybe all of you. Maybe me too. Eveline's voice went cold. But here's what Aldrich doesn't understand. People who have nothing left to lose are the most dangerous force in any empire. You can't threaten them, can't buy them, can't make them surrender because they've already lost everything that matters. All they have left is the choice of how they fall, on their knees or on their feet. She let that settle. Let them feel the weight of choosing. I'm going to the capital, with or without you. I'm going to walk into that palace and I'm going to tear down everything Aldrich built on my corpse. If you want to help, meet me on the southern road at dawn. If you don't, I understand. This isn't your fight unless you decide it is. She climbed down from the well. Her legs nearly gave out. Marcus caught her arm. That was either brilliant or insane, he muttered. Probably both. You really think they'll follow you? I think desperate people will follow anyone who offers them something besides slow death. Whether that's enough depends on how desperate they are. Dawn came. Eveline stood on the southern road with Marcus and Kara, waiting. 50 people appeared, then 100, then 200. Men and women carrying farm tools and hunting bows and knives meant for butchering livestock. No armor, no training, just anger that had finally found direction. An army of the forgotten. Eveline looked at them and felt something break inside her chest. These people were going to die. Most of them. Because she'd convinced them that dying mattered more than surviving. But she'd meant what she said. Better to fall on your feet than live on your knees. Let's go, she said. They marched toward the capital. Not quickly. Not in formation. Just a mass of people who'd decided enough was enough. More joined along the way. Other villages. Other forgotten towns. Word spread faster than soldiers could contain it. The queen was back. The people were rising. The empire was about to learn what happened when you ignored the foundation too long. By the time they reached the capital's outer districts, Eveline's army numbered close to 1,000. Still nothing compared to Aldrich's military. But numbers weren't the point. The point was proving that empires couldn't survive when the people stopped believing in them. The capital looked different. Martial law. Soldiers on every corner. Curfews enforced with brutal efficiency. Aldrich had locked the city down tight. But lockdown meant scared. and scared meant he knew something was coming. Evelyn led her army to the southern gate, the one that opened to worker districts, where the people who kept empires functioning lived and died without recognition. Guards stood at the gate, 20 of them, professional, armed. They saw the approaching crowd and formed a defensive line. Evelyn walked forward alone. Her shoulders still throbbed. Fever still clouded her thoughts. But she walked steady, head high, like she owned every stone in this city. The guard captain stepped forward. "Turn back. The city is under emergency authority. No unauthorized entry." "I'm not unauthorized. I'm the Empress." "You're a fugitive wanted for treason." "Funny. I was about to say the same thing about General Aldrich." Evelyn gestured to the people behind her. "These citizens want to enter their capital. Are you going to stop them?" "If necessary." "With 20 men against 1,000? We have reinforcements minutes away." "Then you better call them, because we're coming through. The only question is whether you want to die defending a traitor or step aside and live." The captain's hand moved to his sword. Then he looked past Evelyn at the crowd. At faces he probably recognized, people from the districts, servants, workers, the invisible population that kept cities functioning. His hand dropped. "Let them through," he said quietly. His men stared at him. "Captain, I said let them through. I'm not killing citizens for following their queen." The line parted. Evelyn walked into the capital she'd been exiled from. Her army followed. Soldiers watched from walls and windows. None moved to stop them, because stopping 1,000 angry citizens required a willingness to massacre them. And most soldiers weren't ready to cross that line. Not yet. The march continued through districts that had been home, past the palace walls, toward the throne room where Aldrich sat wearing power that didn't belong to him. But they didn't reach the throne room, because at the palace gates, Aldrich was waiting. He stood with 500 soldiers in full battle formation, professional, disciplined, ready to kill. Evelyn's army stopped, 1,000 strong but untrained, armed with tools and desperation, staring at an actual military force. The two sides faced each other across the plaza, silent, tense, one command away from slaughter. Aldrich stepped forward. He looked exactly like what he was, a general who'd seized power and was now defending it, confident, ruthless, unshakable. "Evelyn, you should have stayed dead." "I tried. It didn't take." "It will this time." He gestured to his soldiers. "You're outnumbered, outmatched, leading farmers against trained killers. This isn't bravery, it's suicide." "Maybe, but at least we're dying for something we believe in. What are your soldiers dying for? Your ambition? Your vision of an empire that serves you instead of its people?" "I'm saving the empire from itself, from weak leadership, from chaos disguised as mercy." "You're stealing it. Calling theft salvation doesn't change what it is." Aldrich's expression hardened. "I gave you chances to walk away, to disappear, to live quietly somewhere far from power. You refused every one. So this is what happens. You die here. Your followers die here. And the empire moves forward without you. Or your soldiers realize they're killing citizens on your orders and decide maybe you're not worth following. They'll follow, because I actually understand how to lead, how to make hard decisions, how to do what's necessary instead of what's popular." He raised his hand, ready to give the order. Evelyn felt time slow, felt the weight of every person behind her, every life she'd convinced to risk everything, every death that was about to happen because she'd refused to surrender. She'd led them here to die, just like she'd led Thorn into that valley, just like everyone who'd ever trusted her. The realization should have broken her, should have made her stop, surrender, save whoever could still be saved. But she'd spent too long being told to stop, to surrender, to accept her place. She was done accepting. "Fire!" Aldrich shouted. Archers raised bows. Evelyn closed her eyes, waiting for the arrows that would end everything. They never came. She opened her eyes. The archers were lowering their weapons, confusion spreading through Aldrich's ranks, soldiers turning to look behind them. At the palace gates, now opening. At figures emerging. Imperial Guard in full armor, but not Aldrich's men, men wearing the old crest, the Emperor's crest. And at the front, walking like a man who'd remembered what power meant, was Cedric. He looked terrible, thin, exhausted, like he'd been dragged through every level of hell, but he was walking, free, alive. And beside him, battered and bleeding but standing, was Captain Thorne. Eveline's heart nearly stopped. Cedric's voice carried across the plaza. "General Aldrich, you're under arrest for treason. Surrender your command." Aldrich spun, stared, shock and rage fighting for control of his face. "That's impossible. You were imprisoned, secured. There's no way. Ah!" "There's always a way when the guards realize they're following a traitor." Cedric moved forward. "Most of your men are loyal to the Empire, not to you. When I explained what you'd actually done, when I showed them the proof Eveline gathered, they made a choice. Empire or ambition. They chose correctly." Aldrich's soldiers were wavering, looking at each other, at their general, at the Emperor, uncertainty spreading like infection. "You're weak!" Aldrich shouted at Cedric. "You've always been weak. The Empire needs strength." "The Empire needs legitimacy. It needs law. It needs leadership that serves instead of commands." Cedric's voice was steady, strong. "You're finished, Aldrich. Stand down before more people die for your pride." "I'm not finished." Aldrich drew his sword. "I didn't come this far to surrender to a puppet emperor and his broken queen." He charged. Not at Cedric, at Eveline. Because even at the end, he understood where the real threat was. Not the emperor with the title, the empress with the will. Time fractured. Eveline saw the blade coming, saw death in Aldrich's eyes, saw the end of everything. Then Thorne was there, moving faster than should have been possible, his sword intercepting Aldrich's strike, steel screaming against steel. They fought in the space between armies, brutal, fast. Two men who'd spent lifetimes learning how to kill. Aldrich was younger, stronger, but Thorne was fighting for something more than victory. He was fighting for the woman who'd never abandoned him, even when abandoning him would have been easier. Their blades moved too fast to track, a dance of death in the plaza where empires rose and fell. Then Aldrich made a mistake. Overextended on a strike. Left himself open for half a heartbeat. Thorne's blade found his throat. Blood sprayed. Aldrich stumbled, fell to his knees, eyes wide with disbelief. He'd come so close. Seized power. Nearly destroyed everyone who opposed him, but nearly wasn't enough. He collapsed, dead before he hit the ground. Silence crashed across the plaza, absolute and suffocating. Then Aldrich's soldiers began lowering their weapons, dropping them, surrendering to an authority that had finally remembered it was legitimate. The coup was over. The Empire had survived. But as Eveline stood there, watching the aftermath, watching soldiers surrender and citizens cheer, and Cedric accept the loyalty that had nearly destroyed them all, she realized something that made her blood run cold. This wasn't over. Because standing at the edge of the plaza, watching with expressions that mixed satisfaction and calculation, were representatives from the Eastern Kingdoms. Davros, Mira, Liston. They'd come to witness the aftermath, to see which version of the Empire emerged from chaos. And they were smiling, because they understood something Eveline had just realized. The coup had weakened the Empire. The rebellion had fractured it. The near civil war had proven it was vulnerable. Aldrich had failed, but he'd opened a door, shown the Eastern Kingdoms exactly where the cracks were, where pressure could be applied, how close the Empire was to collapsing completely. And now they would push. Not with words, not with diplomacy, with armies. The war Eveline had tried to prevent was coming, not because she'd failed to stop Aldrich, because she'd succeeded. And success had proven the Empire could be beaten. Davros caught her eye, nodded once, a gesture of respect between enemies who understood the game had just begun. Then he turned and walked away. Mira and Liston followed, going back to their kingdoms, to gather forces, to prepare for the invasion they now knew would succeed. Eveline looked at Cedric, at Thorne, at the 1,000 people who'd followed her into potential death, at the Empire that had survived only to face something worse. "We have a problem," she said. Cedric moved beside her. "I know. They're coming, with everything they have." "Yes. We're not ready. Then we get ready. We rebuild. We fortify. We show them that empires don't break just because they bend." Eveline looked at the palace. At the throne room where power had been contested and seized and reclaimed so many times, it had lost meaning. Power didn't come from thrones, it came from people willing to defend what mattered, and right now what mattered was proving that the empire could survive not just internal betrayal, but external threat. "How long do we have?" she asked. Thorn, bleeding from a dozen wounds but standing like nothing could break him, answered, 3 months, maybe less. They'll want to strike before we recover. 3 months to rebuild a fractured empire, to unite provinces that barely trusted each other, to convince people who just survived one war that another one was coming, and this time there was no running from it. 3 months to transform from broken survivors into something strong enough to face kingdoms that smelled blood in the water. "Then we better start now," Eveline said. She looked at the people gathered in the plaza. Her people, the forgotten citizens who'd risen up because she'd asked them to, because she'd proven that asking mattered more than commanding. They were exhausted, terrified, processing what they'd just survived, but they were looking at her, waiting, ready to follow if she gave them something worth following toward. Eveline felt the weight of that trust, the terrible responsibility of mattering to people who had nothing left except faith that she wouldn't waste their sacrifice. She'd survived being forgotten, survived assassination, survived betrayal and coups and escape and infection and a march that should have killed her. Now she had to survive war, not for herself, not for Cedric, not for the throne or the title or the power, for the people behind her who decided empires were worth fighting for when the empire remembered they existed. "Listen," she said, her voice carried across the plaza. "What's coming next is worse than anything we've survived. The Eastern kingdoms are going to invade. They're going to bring armies and violence and everything they have because they think we're weak. They think we're broken. They think we're ready to fall." She paused. "Are they right?" Silence. Then someone in the crowd shouted, "No!" Others joined, a wave of voices, defiant, angry, determined. Eveline smiled. It was fierce and cold and absolutely merciless. "Then let's prove them wrong. Let's show those kingdoms what empires look like when they stop fighting themselves and start fighting for themselves. Let's make them regret every choice that led them to our borders." She turned to Cedric, to Thorn, to the soldiers and citizens and everyone who'd survived the coup, and the chaos, and the near destruction of everything they'd bled to protect. "We have 3 months. Let's make them count." The Empire prepared for war. Not the war Aldrich wanted. Not the war the Eastern kingdoms expected, but the war that would determine whether forgotten queens and reluctant emperors and citizens armed with farming tools could stand against professional armies. Whether will could triumph over force. Whether empires built on loyalty were stronger than empires built on fear. The answer would be written in blood and fire, and the bodies of everyone who chose to stand when falling would have been easier. But that was 3 months away. Right now, in this moment, with the sun setting over a capital that had almost died, Eveline stood beside people who'd proven that power wasn't about control. It was about refusing to surrender even when surrender was the only logical choice. The Eastern kingdoms were coming. Let them come. The Iron Queen was ready. 3 months turned into a crucible that refined everything weak and burned away everything unnecessary. Eveline stood in the war room every morning before dawn, mapping strategies with generals who'd been recalled from exile. Men who understood that wars weren't won by the side with more soldiers, but by the side that refused to break when breaking would have been merciful. The Eastern kingdoms were gathering. Intelligence reports came daily. Armies massing at borders. Supply lines stretching toward invasion routes. 3 kingdoms unified by the promise of easy prey. They thought the empire was wounded, vulnerable, ready to collapse under pressure. They were partially right. The empire was wounded. But wounds either killed you or taught you exactly how much pain you could survive before choosing to become something that couldn't be wounded the same way twice. Eveline chose the second option. Fortifications rose along the eastern border. Not the massive walls that declared strength, but the strategic positions that multiplied effectiveness. Terrain that favored defense. Choke points where numbers meant less than positioning. Places where empires could hold against kingdoms if they were willing to bleed for every inch. The military rebuilt itself. Not under Aldrich's model of brutal efficiency, but under something older. A structure where soldiers understood what they were protecting instead of just who they were obeying. Provincial militias integrated with professional forces. Citizens trained alongside career soldiers. The distinction between military and civilian blurred until the entire empire became its own defense. Cedric surprised everyone, including himself. He'd spent months being the weak emperor, the figurehead, the man whose throne was more real than his authority, but near death and imprisonment had stripped away whatever delusions he'd been carrying about what emperors actually were. He worked beside Eveline now. Not above her, not below her. Beside her. Two people who'd forgotten how to be partners, remembering that thrones only mattered when the people sitting on them understood partnership wasn't weakness. It was the only strength that lasted. They stood together in the throne room 6 weeks into preparation, reviewing reports that painted an increasingly grim picture. The eastern kingdoms would invade within a month. Their forces outnumbered the empire's 2-to-1. Professional armies against a hastily rebuilt defense. The math didn't work. But math assumed both sides were playing the same game. Eveline wasn't. She looked at Cedric across the table, covered in maps and troop movements and calculations that predicted defeat. "We can't win a conventional war," she said. "I know. So we don't fight one." Elaborate. The Eastern kingdoms are unified right now because they smell blood. But that unity is fragile. 3 kingdoms that normally compete are cooperating because they think we're easy. We prove we're not easy, that unity fractures. Each kingdom starts calculating whether the cost is worth the potential gain, whether their allies will betray them the moment an opportunity appears. Cedric studied the map. "You want to break their alliance before they invade. I want to make them break themselves. Hit them hard enough that each kingdom starts doubting the others. Make victory look expensive enough that cooperation becomes competition for who can extract the most gain while risking the least." "How?" Eveline traced her finger along the border. "Davros commands from the north, Mira from the center, Liston from the south. 3 separate forces that will need to coordinate. We don't fight all 3. We isolate one. Destroy it completely. Make the other 2 kingdoms wonder if their allies' destruction means more spoils to divide or proof that maybe this empire isn't as weak as they thought. Which one do we isolate?" "Davros. He's the warrior. Pride won't let him retreat even when retreating is smart. We bait him into overextending, cut his supply lines, surround him. Then we don't just defeat his army, we annihilate it so completely that Mira and Liston have to reconsider whether continuing is worth the risk of ending up the same way." Cedric was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "That's brutal. That's survival. We're not strong enough to win clean, so we win ugly and hope ugly is enough." They spent the next 3 weeks preparing the trap, moving forces, staging weaknesses that looked real, creating the illusion that Davros's northern route was the easy path to the capital, letting him believe his own intelligence instead of questioning why intelligence was so easy to gather. The invasion came at dawn on the 87th day. 3 armies crossed the border simultaneously, exactly as predicted. Davros in the north with 40,000 men, Mira in the center with 30,000, Liston in the south with 25,000, nearly 100,000 soldiers against the Empire's 50,000, overwhelming force if they fought conventionally. Suicide if Eveline's plan failed. The Empire's forces retreated before Davros's advance, not routed, controlled withdrawal, making him chase, drawing him deeper into territory that looked like opportunity but was actually a noose tightening with every mile. Eveline commanded from a ridge overlooking the valley where everything would be decided. Thorn stood beside her, armor battered from 3 months of constant preparation, eyes scanning the terrain with professional calculation. "He's taking the bait," Thorn said. "He's confident. Confidence makes men blind. So does desperation. We're both. That's why this works or we all die." Davros's army pushed deeper. 40,000 men strung out along a valley with forested ridges on both sides. Perfect ambush terrain if you had the forces to execute it. The Empire didn't. But it had something else. Citizens who'd spent 3 months learning that wars weren't fought by soldiers alone. That empires survived when everyone fought instead of waiting for professionals to save them. The signal went up. Fire arrows from the ridges. Thousands of them. Not aimed at soldiers. Aimed at the forest itself. dry timber that had been prepared, soaked in oil, ready to burn. The valley became an inferno within minutes. Davros's army, stretched thin and surrounded by flames, fractured into chaos. No retreat, no advance. Just confusion and smoke and heat that killed as efficiently as blades. Then the Empire's forces hit from both ends, not overwhelming numbers, but concentrated, disciplined, hitting an army that had lost cohesion and was dying from its own panic. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it ended, Davros's 40,000 had been reduced to scattered survivors fleeing north. The king himself was captured, burned, and broken, screaming that this wasn't how wars were fought. Eveline stood over him in the aftermath, blood on her hands, smoke in her lungs, victory tasting like ash. "You're right," she said. "This isn't how wars are fought. This is how they're survived, and you forgot that survival doesn't follow rules." She left him chained for his kingdoms to witness, a message written in his failure. News of Davros's annihilation reached Mira and Lyston within 2 days. Their response was predictable. Both armies halted their advance. Both sent envoys requesting negotiation. The alliance had fractured exactly as planned. Mira wanted assurances that her forces wouldn't meet the same fate. Lyston wanted to discuss terms that didn't involve his army burning in valleys, while empires that should have been easy prey proved they were anything but. Eveline met with both envoys separately. Let each believe they were getting exclusive terms. Let each think they were outmaneuvering the other. Then she told them both the same thing. Withdraw. Immediately. Completely. Or discover whether their forces could survive what Davros couldn't. Mira withdrew first, too smart to gamble everything on pride. Her army retreated in good order, taking their equipment and leaving behind only the promise that next time would be different. Lyston held out for 3 more days. Then intelligence reached him that the Empire was moving forces south, that the same trap that killed Davros was being prepared for him. He withdrew before testing whether that intelligence was accurate. It wasn't. The Empire didn't have forces to spare for another ambush, but Lyston didn't know that, and fear of the unknown was more effective than any actual threat. The invasion ended not with a final battle, but with 3 kingdoms retreating to their borders and looking at each other with suspicion that would take years to overcome. The Empire had survived, barely, bloodied, depleted, held together by will and desperation, and citizens who'd learned that being forgotten meant you could surprise everyone when you refused to stay invisible. But survived. Eveline stood on the palace balcony a week after the last enemy soldier crossed back over the border. The capital below was rebuilding. Again. Markets reopening, people returning to routines that approximated normal, life continuing because life had no other choice. Thorn found her there. He'd been promoted to commander of the Imperial Guard, a position he'd accepted with visible reluctance because accepting meant staying in the palace instead of disappearing into whatever quiet retirement soldiers dreamed about. "You look tired," he said. "I am tired. We won. We survived. There's a difference." Thorn leaned against the balcony rail beside her. They stood in silence for a while. 2 people who'd been through too much to need words for everything. "What happens now?" he finally asked. "Now we rebuild. Again. Fortify the borders. Strengthen alliances. Prepare for the next threat, because there's always a next threat." "That sounds exhausting." "It is." Eveline looked at him. "You could leave. Retire. Find some quiet place where wars are distant rumors instead of daily reality." "So could you." "No, I couldn't. This is what I am now. The woman who wouldn't stay buried, who survived being erased and betrayed and nearly destroyed. Leaving would make all of that meaningless." "Would it? Or would it mean you finally got to choose something for yourself instead of for an empire that keeps trying to kill you?" Eveline didn't answer, because the answer was complicated and she was too tired for complicated. Cedric appeared in the doorway behind them. He looked better than he had in months. Like near death in war had burned away whatever softness had made him vulnerable to men like Holt and Aldrich, and replaced it with something harder but more genuine. "The council is gathering," he said. "They want to discuss terms for permanent peace with the Eastern Kingdoms. There's no such thing as permanent peace, just intervals between wars. Then we make the interval as long as possible." Cedric moved to stand with them. "Eveline, I need to say something." "What?" I'm sorry. For everything. For Seraphine, for forgetting what you were, for letting ambitious men turn me into a puppet while you were fighting to keep the Empire alive. He paused. You saved us multiple times, and I repaid you by erasing you. You were weak. Weak people make weak choices. Yes, but weak isn't permanent unless you choose to stay weak. I'm choosing differently now. Evelyn studied him. The man she'd married had been charming and uncertain and overwhelmed by a throne he'd inherited without earning. This man was different, scarred by failure, hardened by consequences. Still uncertain, but no longer paralyzed by that uncertainty. People changed when they had to. When the alternative was dying as whatever inadequate version they'd been before reality intervened. What are you choosing? She asked. To be a partner instead of a figurehead. To share power instead of hoarding it. To build an empire where competence matters more than lineage. He met her eyes. To be the emperor you needed instead of the one I was. That's a good speech? It's not a speech, it's a promise. Evelyn wanted to believe him, wanted to think that surviving near destruction had transformed him into someone reliable. But trust wasn't given. It was earned slowly through actions that proved words meant something beyond the moment they were spoken. Then prove it, she said. Every day, every decision, every moment when choosing the easy path would betray what we bled to protect. Prove you mean it. I will. They stood together on the balcony, three people who'd survived an empire's attempt to devour itself, who'd learned that power without partnership was just tyranny waiting to collapse, that strength without wisdom was violence searching for justification. The council meeting lasted 3 hours, debates about borders and reparations and treaties that would bind the empire and eastern kingdoms into something resembling stability. Evelyn participated, but her mind was elsewhere, on the village girl Kara, who'd given her water when she was dying, on the soldiers who'd defected rather than follow Aldrich, on Thorn nearly dying in a valley to buy her seconds of survival, on every person who'd chosen to stand when falling would have been easier. Those people were why empires mattered, not the thrones or titles or power, but the people who believed empires could be something more than machines that devoured citizens for the benefit of whoever sat highest. After the council, Evelyn returned to chambers that had been hers, then hadn't, then were again. The Eastern Wing had been demolished completely, torn down and rebuilt as offices for administrators who actually served the provinces instead of exploiting them. Symbolic. But symbols mattered when reality was too brutal to face directly. She found a letter waiting, no seal, no signature, just words written in careful script. You won. But victory is just the beginning of the next war. The Eastern kingdoms won't forget their humiliation. Davros's kingdom will demand revenge. Mira will scheme. Liston will wait for opportunity. And inside your own empire, nobles who lost power will plot to reclaim it. You've earned a moment of peace. Don't waste it believing peace will last. The letter wasn't wrong. Victory had bought time, not security. Time to prepare for whatever came next while pretending normal life was possible. But Evelyn had learned something essential through assassination attempts and coups and invasions. Normal life was an illusion, people bought with blood and maintained with vigilance. The moment you believed you were safe was the moment someone else decided you were vulnerable. She burned the letter, watched the words turn to ash. Then she did something she hadn't done in months. She went to find the wooden bird Alara had given her in Thorn Hollow. It was still there, tucked in a drawer, small and worn and representing a moment when a child's faith had meant more than any crown. Evelyn held it, felt its weight, remembered the girl asking if she was still the queen. The answer then had been yes. The answer now was more complicated. She was the queen. But being queen meant understanding that power wasn't about control. It was about responsibility to people who'd given you authority because they believed you'd use it to protect instead of dominate. Every decision she made rippled through lives she'd never see. Every choice created consequences that would outlast her. That weight had nearly crushed her in the Eastern Wing when she'd been powerless to affect anything. Now the weight was different, heavier, because now her choices actually mattered. The door opened. Thorn entered without knocking. They'd moved past formality into something simpler, partnership built on shared survival. You're thinking too much, he said. Someone has to. What about? Whether any of this was worth it. The deaths, the suffering, the people who followed me because I convinced them dying for empires mattered. Thorn sat across from her. You're asking if saving the empire justified the cost. Yes. Wrong question. What's the right one? Would not fighting have cost less? Would surrendering to Aldrich have saved lives? Would letting the Eastern kingdoms invade unopposed have caused less suffering? He paused. You're weighing perfect outcomes against real ones. Perfect doesn't exist. Real is all we get. And real means choosing between terrible options and hoping the one you pick is slightly less terrible than the alternatives. That's bleak. That's command. That's leadership. That's what it means to be the person everyone looks to when everything's falling apart. He leaned forward. You saved the empire. Not perfectly, not cleanly, but you saved it. Everyone who died, died fighting for something they believed mattered more than survival. That's not a waste. That's the only thing that gives death meaning. Eveline looked at this wooden bird in her hand. I'm tired, Marcus. Tired of fighting. Tired of calculating. Tired of being the woman everyone needs me to be instead of whoever I actually am underneath all this. Then rest, not forever, but long enough to remember you're human instead of just useful. And if something happens while I'm resting, then Cedric handles it, or I do, or the council, or the empire remembers it's made of people who can solve problems without waiting for you to solve everything. He stood. You're not alone anymore. You were for a long time. In the Eastern Wing, during Aldrich's coup, on the road from Greymarch, but you're not now. Let other people carry weight for a while. He left before she could respond. Eveline sat in silence, turning the wooden bird over in her hands, thinking about everything it represented. Faith, hope, the belief that someone in power actually cared. She'd earned that faith through blood and survival and refusing to surrender when surrender would have been easier. But faith was also a burden, a weight that demanded she keep being the person people believed she was, even when that person felt like armor that no longer fit. Maybe that was the final lesson. Power wasn't about being strong enough to never break. It was about breaking and choosing to rebuild as something different, something that learned from fractures instead of pretending they didn't exist. The empire had broken. Eveline had broken. Cedric had broken. But broken things could be repaired, not back to what they were, into something new, something that remembered its weakness and built strength around those memories instead of hiding them. 3 months later, a ceremony was held in the throne room. Not a celebration of victory, a remembrance of cost. Names were read. Every soldier who died defending the border. Every citizen who'd fallen during the invasion. Every person whose sacrifice had bought the empire another day. The list took 6 hours to complete. 6 hours of names, of lives reduced to syllables, of families broken, of futures that would never happen because someone had decided empires were worth dying for. Eveline stood through all of it, listening, bearing witness, refusing to look away from the price her decisions had cost. Cedric stood beside her, Thorn behind, the council in attendance, citizens filling the chamber until it overflowed into courtyards where the names echoed off stone walls that had seen too many wars.